When I refused to pay my brother-in-law's crushing $90,000 debt, my father-in-law exploded in rage, then secretly stripped my husband and me of our entire inheritance overnight. But just when they thought they had destroyed us, a shocking truth was exposed. My name is Nia. I am 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant for a top-tier financial firm in Atlanta. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth and tried to use you for their own gain. Thanksgiving dinner in the wealthy Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta was never about gratitude or giving thanks. For my father-in-law, Calvin, it was a carefully curated theatrical production designed to showcase his wealth and absolute power. Calvin was an honorary pastor at a massive megachurch, a ruthless real estate tycoon, and the owner of a highly profitable chain of luxury car dealerships. His sprawling mansion with its towering columns, imported marble floors, and vaulted ceilings was built to intimidate anyone who walked through the front doors. I sat at the long mahogany dining table next to my husband, Jamal. Jamal was a brilliant 34-year-old urban planner, but in his father's imposing presence, he always shrank into a submissive version of himself. Across the table sat Darius, Jamal's 31-year-old brother and the undisputed golden child of the family. Next to Darius was his wife Tasha, a woman whose entire personality revolved around wearing designer labels and spending money she did not earn. At the far end of the table sat my mother-in-law Brenda, wearing a perfectly tailored silk dress and a constant mask of fake Christian piety. The extravagant meal had barely begun when Calvin abruptly pushed his plate away. The clinking of silverware stopped, and the room immediately fell silent. Everyone in the family knew that when Calvin stopped eating, a sermon or a demand was coming. Instead of speaking, he reached inside the breast pocket of his custom suit and pulled out a thick stack of papers. He slammed them onto the center of the table. The heavy thud echoed off the dining room walls like a gunshot. The papers slid across the polished mahogany, coming to a halt just inches from my water glass. Even upside down, my trained eyes instantly recognized the formats. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my days tracking hidden assets and uncovering financial fraud. I recognized aggressive collection notices, overdue high-interest loan demands, and severe business deficit statements immediately. The bottom line figure on the top page was highlighted in bold black ink: $90,000. Jamal stared at the papers, his voice dropping to a nervous whisper. "What is this, Dad?" "This is a family emergency," Calvin declared. His deep, commanding voice left no room for argument or hesitation. "Your brother Darius has run into some unexpected business hurdles. The devil is trying to attack our family and test our standing in this community, but we will not allow it. We need to clear this $90,000 debt by Monday morning. If we do not, the creditors are going to initiate public legal action against him. That kind of public scandal would be a permanent stain on our family legacy, and I absolutely will not permit it." I shifted my gaze to Darius. He sat there in a dark green velvet blazer, casually swirling an expensive glass of red wine. He showed absolutely zero remorse for the massive debt sitting on the table. Darius marketed himself online as a highly successful cryptocurrency guru and investment mentor. His social media feeds were flooded with pictures of private jets, VIP club sections, and stacks of $100 bills. Yet here he was, acting like a helpless child waiting for his powerful father to clean up his financial mess. Calvin turned his sharp, authoritative glare directly toward Jamal and me. "I know you two have been saving for that house in Sandy Springs. I know you have well over $100,000 sitting in your joint savings account doing absolutely nothing. You are going to withdraw $90,000 tomorrow morning and wire it directly to your brother. Consider it an investment in protecting the family legacy." The sheer audacity of his demand sucked the air right out of my lungs. He was not asking for a favor. He was not suggesting a loan. He was issuing a direct order to hand over our life savings to cover his golden child's mistakes. Jamal looked at me, pure panic washing over his face. He had spent 34 years conditioned to obey his father's every command. The psychological grip Calvin had on him was suffocating. I saw Jamal open his mouth, preparing to cave in to the pressure, preparing to sacrifice our future and our hard-earned money to appease a tyrant. I immediately placed my hand over his beneath the table and squeezed his fingers hard. "Absolutely not," I said. My voice was calm, measured, and completely devoid of the submission Calvin was used to hearing from his family members. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Calvin slowly leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Excuse me, what did you just say to me?" "I said no," I replied, keeping my posture perfectly straight and meeting his intimidating stare without blinking. "I am a forensic accountant, Calvin. I analyze numbers, assets, and liabilities for a living. Jamal and I have spent the last 5 years working 60-hour weeks. We have sacrificed vacations, skipped luxury purchases, and saved every single dollar to buy our own home. We are not liquidating our future to cover $90,000 of reckless debt for a man who just bought a brand new Porsche 2 weeks ago." Darius slammed his wine glass down on the table, finally showing some emotion. "The Porsche is a necessary business expense, Nia. It is about projecting an image of extreme success to attract high net worth clients. You would not understand how elite networking operates at this level of society." "I understand basic math, Darius," I fired back coldly. "I understand that if you can afford to finance a $150,000 sports car to impress strangers on the internet, you can afford to pay your own debts. Sell the car." That highly logical response was the spark that ignited a massive explosion. Brenda gasped loudly, slamming both of her hands onto the table. Dramatic tears instantly sprang to her eyes as she clutched her pearl necklace. "Lord Jesus, give me strength to deal with this woman," she wailed. "How can you be so incredibly selfish, Nia?" The good book commands us to lift our brothers up when they stumble in the dark. We are a family built on faith, charity, and absolute unity. You are bringing a spirit of division and greed into my home on Thanksgiving Day of all days. Tasha let out a sharp, condescending laugh. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in pure disgust. "Do not waste your breath trying to educate her, Mama Brenda. Nia comes from a completely different world. She grew up in a cramped working-class neighborhood with parents who clocked in and out for an hourly wage. People like her do not understand the concept of generational wealth. They do not know how to protect a family name because they never had a name worth protecting in the first place. That is exactly why poor families stay poor. They do not know how to pool their resources to protect their own blood." The blatant disrespect was staggering, but I refused to let her see me sweat. I turned my attention directly to Tasha, my voice dropping to an icy chill. "Generational wealth. Is that what you call this pathetic display? Is that what you call begging your brother-in-law to empty his hard-earned savings account because your husband blew his money on flashy cars and fake Rolex watches? That is not generational wealth, Tasha. That is generational delusion. You are living a fake lifestyle funded by bad debt and daddy's constant bailouts." Calvin stood up violently. His heavy wooden chair crashed to the floor behind him. The veins in his neck were bulging as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You ungrateful, arrogant little girl. You walk into my house, eat my food, and insult my bloodline. You forget your place. Jamal, tell your wife to shut her mouth and write the check, or there will be severe consequences for both of you." Jamal swallowed hard, his voice trembling but surprisingly clear. "Dad, Nia is right. We cannot give Darius our house money. It is everything we have worked for." Calvin's face twisted into a mask of pure cruelty. He stared at his eldest son with absolute contempt. "Fine. You want to act like strangers? You want to disrespect the family that gave you everything, then you can lose everything." He walked over to a side table and picked up a manila folder, throwing it onto Jamal's lap. "The luxury penthouse you two live in was a wedding gift from me. But legally, it remains under the ownership of my corporate LLC. Since you refuse to act like family, I am officially revoking that gift. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my property. Furthermore, I am calling my lawyers in the morning. Jamal, your name is being permanently removed from the family trust and all corporate holdings. You are cut off." Brenda gasped again, but did absolutely nothing to stop her husband's rage. Tasha and Darius exchanged a quick look of triumphant satisfaction. They had won. They had successfully weaponized Calvin's ego to destroy us. I stood up smoothly, picking up my purse from the back of my chair. I did not cry. I did not beg. I looked Calvin dead in the eye. Keep your penthouse, Calvin. House. Keep your corrupt trust fund. I would rather build my own empire from scratch than be a slave to yours. I grabbed Jamal's hand and pulled him toward the door. As we walked out of the dining room, leaving their toxic feast behind, I realized something vital. The devil's gifts always come with a price tag designed to ruin you. We had 48 hours to pack our entire lives into boxes, but they had no idea that they had just unleashed a storm that would eventually burn their fake empire to ashes. The walk to our car felt like crossing a battlefield. The cool November air hit my face, grounding me in the reality of what just happened. We were effectively homeless, but my mind was already calculating our next move. I knew their financial secrets were buried deep, and I was going to find them. The drive back to our penthouse was suffocatingly silent. Jamal gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white under the streetlights of downtown Atlanta. He was in shock. For his entire life, Calvin had conditioned him to believe that compliance equaled survival. Tonight, Jamal had finally chosen me over the family empire, and the sheer terror of that choice was paralyzing him. I did not try to comfort him with sweet, empty promises. Comfort was a luxury we could no longer afford. We had exactly 48 hours to dismantle the life we had built together. When we stepped inside the penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a beautiful cage. Calvin had used this property to leash Jamal to his corporate machine, making sure my husband felt perpetually indebted to the family name. I walked straight into the kitchen, pulled out a notepad, and began drafting a logistical action plan. Jamal collapsed onto our expensive leather sofa, burying his face in his hands. "Nia," he whispered, his voice cracking. "He actually did it. He cut me off. My trust fund, the company, shares everything. I have nothing left." "You have your architecture license," I said, not looking up from my list. "You have your talent, and you have me. We are leaving this place with our dignity intact. I need you to go to the hardware store and buy as many heavy-duty cardboard boxes as you can fit in your car. We start packing the bedroom first." Jamal stared at me, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. He stood up slowly, the reality of our eviction settling heavily on his shoulders. He grabbed his keys without another word and headed out. The next 36 hours were a grueling marathon of physical labor and emotional endurance. We wrapped crystal glasses in newspaper and shoved designer clothes into cheap plastic bags. The physical exhaustion was intense, but I used it to fuel my focus. I scrutinized every single document we packed, setting aside anything related to Jamal's past work for Calvin's real estate firm. My mind was already shifting into full forensic mode. I knew Calvin ran a sophisticated financial web, and I needed raw data to tear it apart. By the morning of our final day, the penthouse was stripped bare. Stacks of brown boxes lined the hardwood floors, waiting to be loaded into the rented moving truck parked downstairs. Jamal was sweating, carrying our mattress out the door when the elevator chimed softly. The polished chrome doors slid open, revealing the absolute last people I wanted to see. Darius and Tasha stepped into our hallway, radiating pure, unadulterated arrogance. Tasha was holding an artisanal iced coffee in one hand and a bright yellow measuring tape in the other. Darius twirled a shiny new set of keys on his index finger, the very keys Calvin had just reissued for this penthouse. "Oh, look at this," Tasha sneered, stepping over a box labeled kitchen supplies. "It looks like the trash is finally taking itself out. I told Mama Brenda this place always smelled a little too working class since you moved in, Nia. Do not worry, we are going to hire professional cleaners to fumigate it before we bring our furniture over." Darius chuckled, leaning against the doorframe. "Damn, Jamal. I honestly thought you would have crawled back to Dad crying by now. You really gave up your entire inheritance for her. You realize you are going to be renting some roach-infested apartment on the south side of town now, right? All because your wife does not know when to keep her mouth shut." Jamal dropped the box he was holding. His chest heaved as he took a threatening step toward his younger brother. I put my hand flat against Jamal's chest, stopping him instantly. I did not break eye contact with Darius. Let them talk, Jamal, I said calmly. They are going to need a nice place to live, considering Darius cannot afford to buy a house with his own money. It is cute that Daddy had to evict his eldest son just to put a roof over his youngest son's head. Enjoy the hand-me-down apartment, Tasha. Tasha's fake smile vanished. She snapped her measuring tape aggressively. Watch your tone, Nia. You are standing in my living room now. Calvin officially transferred the LLC property rights to Darius this morning. We are just here to make sure you do not steal any of the high-end appliances on your way out. We know how your people get when they are desperate. I ignored her completely. I pulled my smartphone from my back pocket and opened the video camera. I hit record and began walking slowly through the empty penthouse, speaking clearly and formally into the microphone. Today is Saturday, November 28th at 9:15 in the morning. I am documenting the final condition of the property located at Unit 42B. As the video clearly shows, the hardwood floors are pristine. The marble countertops are undamaged. All state-of-the-art appliances are intact, clean, and fully functional. There is absolutely no damage to the drywall fixtures or plumbing. I panned the camera directly onto Darius and Tasha, capturing their irritated faces. The new tenants, Darius and Tasha, have arrived prior to our official departure time. I am handing over possession of this immaculate property directly to them. Any damages, missing items, or maintenance issues discovered after 9:20 this morning are entirely their legal and financial responsibility. I stopped recording, saved the file, and backed it up to my secure cloud server. Then I walked over to Tasha, picked up my set of heavy metal keys, and dropped them directly into her designer coffee cup. The dark liquid splashed over the rim, staining her pristine white sleeve. "Oops," I said, my voice dripping with cold sarcasm. My hand slipped. "Good luck measuring the curtains, Tasha." Tasha let out a high-pitched shriek, frantically grabbing napkins from her expensive purse to dab at the coffee stain. Darius took an angry step forward, his fists clenched. "You crazy witch! You are going to pay for that." "Pay with what?" I asked, tilting my head mockingly. "Calvin just took everything we have. You cannot squeeze blood from a stone, Darius. But you should probably check your own bank accounts. I hear $90,000 debts accrue interest very quickly." I grabbed the last box of files, gestured for Jamal to follow, and stepped into the elevator. The doors slid closed on Darius's red, furious face. As the elevator descended to the loading dock, Jamal let out a long, shaky breath. He leaned his head against the metal wall, staring at the ceiling. "Nia," he whispered, the exhaustion finally breaking through his tough exterior. "What are we going to do? I have $32 in my checking account. My credit cards are tied to the firm and Dad froze them last night. We have the moving truck, and we have that tiny apartment you managed to secure, but we have absolutely no safety net. I built buildings for that man for 10 years, and he wiped my entire existence out with a single phone call." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying vulnerability. "I should have just apologized. I should have just let him scream at me and taken the abuse. At least you would not be sleeping on an air mattress tonight." I dropped the box of files onto the elevator floor. I grabbed Jamal by the shoulders, forcing him to look me directly in the eyes. I needed to establish an iron boundary right here and right now. "Listen to me very carefully, Jamal," I said, my voice fierce and uncompromising. "You can go back up there right now. You can drop to your knees, beg Calvin for forgiveness, and offer to pay your brother's debt. You can go back to being Calvin's obedient little pawn. But if you do that, you will do it as a single man. I will walk out of this loading dock and never look back." Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes locked on mine. Or I continued, my grip tightening on his shoulders. "You can get in that moving truck with me. We will sleep on an air mattress. We will eat cheap noodles for a month. But we will do it as free people. You are a brilliant architect, Jamal. You do not need his corrupt empire to succeed. I am not going to let you crawl back to a man who uses your livelihood as a weapon. You either stand with me, and we burn his fake empire to the ground, or you go back to your cage. Choose." The elevator chimed, signaling our arrival at the ground floor. The doors slid open, revealing the dark concrete expanse of the loading garage where our rented moving truck idled. Jamal looked at the truck, then back at me. I saw the exact moment the frightened son died, and the man I married woke up. His posture straightened. The fear in his eyes hardened into pure resolve. He reached down, picked up the heavy box of files, and carried it straight to the truck. "I am with you, Naya," he said, tossing the box into the back. "Let it burn." We drove out of the luxury high-rise complex without looking back. The transition from the elite heart of Buckhead to a cramped, outdated rental on the south side of Atlanta was a brutal shock to the system. Our new apartment smelled faintly of bleach and old carpets. The walls were thin, the plumbing groaned every time we turned on the faucet, and our living room was barely large enough to hold our sofa. But as we sat on the floor that first night eating cheap takeout from paper cartons, I felt an incredible surge of power. Calvin thought he had broken us by stripping away our comfort. He did not realize that by taking away our luxury, he had also taken away his leverage. He had severed the only chain keeping Jamal under his control. The very next morning, the smear campaign began. It started with my phone blowing up with text messages from mutual friends and extended family members. Calvin and Brenda had not wasted a single second. They had marched right into their massive Sunday church service and stood before the congregation to play the ultimate victims. Brenda had openly wept at the pulpit, asking the thousands of church members to pray for her eldest son, who had been brainwashed and stolen away by a greedy, manipulative woman. Word spread through Atlanta's elite African-American business circles like wildfire. Calvin told his wealthy investors and country club associates that I had forced Jamal to abandon his family because I was caught trying to embezzle money from the family trust. They painted me as a ruthless gold digger who turned Jamal against his own flesh and blood when my scheme was discovered. By Monday afternoon, Jamal's personal architectural clients began calling to cancel their contracts. His mentors stopped returning his emails. People we had invited to our wedding completely ghosted us, deleting our numbers and blocking us on social media to avoid drawing Calvin's wrath. We were entirely ostracized. Jamal sat at our small kitchen table, staring blankly at his laptop screen as another cancellation email popped into his inbox. "They are blacklisting us," he said quietly. "Dad is calling in every favor he has in this city to make sure nobody hires me. He wants to starve us out until we come begging." I poured myself a cup of black coffee, feeling the caffeine hit my system like a jolt of pure adrenaline. Instead of crying over lost friends, the profound isolation gave me ultimate focus. With no family ties left to preserve, no social obligations to attend, and absolutely nothing left to lose, the gloves were officially off. I opened my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and stared at the glowing screen. "Let him try to starve us out," I said, bringing up the public tax registry for the state of Georgia. "He thinks he is a master manipulator. He thinks he can hide behind his pulpit and his luxury car dealerships. But numbers do not lie, Jamal. People lie. Egos lie. But the math always tells the absolute truth." I began typing rapidly, pulling up the corporate registration records for Calvin's megachurch charity fund and his top-producing dealerships. "I am a forensic accountant," I whispered, watching the first batch of financial data load onto my screen. "And I am about to dissect your father's entire existence." I did not sleep that first night. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in our small, outdated apartment. I pulled up the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry and started running searches on Calvin's primary corporation. Jamal sat beside me on the cheap carpet, drinking terrible instant coffee, feeding me names of obscure holding companies he remembered from his decade of designing commercial properties for his father. Every time Jamal gave me a name, I traced its registration. It was a tedious, agonizing process, but this is exactly what forensic accountants do. We look for the anomalies. We look for the ghosts in the machine. By day 3, my spreadsheets were massive. I cross-referenced public tax records, property deeds, and charity disclosures tied to Calvin's megachurch, the Faith and Legacy Foundation. Calvin always bragged that his church was the cornerstone of the community, funneling millions into local development. But when I mapped the expenditures, the numbers started screaming at me. "Look at this," I told Jamal, pointing to a highlighted row on my screen. I isolated the $90,000 debt Calvin threw at us during Thanksgiving. Darius claimed it was a business deficit from his cryptocurrency ventures. but the collection notice was issued by a private consulting firm, not a bank or a crypto exchange. Jamal squinted at the screen. I know that firm. They consult for the city zoning board. Dad uses them whenever he needs a commercial building permit fast-tracked through the city council. Exactly, I said, feeling the adrenaline rush through my veins. Darius did not lose $90,000 trading fake internet money. He was tasked with paying a bribe to a local zoning commissioner to fast-track Calvin's new commercial development complex. Darius probably embezzled the bribe money for his own lavish lifestyle, failed to pay the official, and the official started sending aggressive collection notices under the guise of consulting fees. Calvin was not bailing out Darius's bad investments. He was trying to cover up a felony bribery charge, and he tried to use our house savings to do it. Jamal leaned back, the color draining from his face. My father is bribing city officials. It is much worse than that, I replied, pulling up a secondary spreadsheet. The $90,000 bribe is just a tiny symptom of a massive disease. I spent the last 48 hours tracking the capital flow between the Faith and Legacy Foundation and Calvin's luxury car dealerships. I explained the entire criminal ecosystem to my husband. Calvin was using his megachurch as a giant washing machine. Wealthy donors would make massive tax-deductible contributions to the church's charity fund. Calvin would then use that untaxed charity money to purchase high-end inventory for his car dealerships under the table. The dealerships would sell the cars to cash buyers, reporting the revenue as legitimate corporate profit. It was a textbook money laundering and tax evasion operation. They were cleaning millions of dollars every single quarter. We have him, Jamal whispered, staring at the undeniable proof on the screen. We actually have him. Not yet, I said, closing the laptop. We have the data, but data is easy to deny in court. Calvin has highly paid lawyers who could claim this is just a series of clerical errors. We need a confession. We need someone on the inside to admit exactly how the machine operates. We did not have to wait long for the opportunity to present itself. 2 weeks after we were evicted, a loud, aggressive pounding echoed through our cheap apartment door. Jamal and I exchanged a tense look. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was working remotely and Jamal was sketching a new independent project at the kitchen table. I walked to the door and looked through the scratched peephole. Darius was standing in the narrow, dimly lit hallway. He looked completely unhinged. His designer velvet blazer was wrinkled. He was sweating profusely, and his signature diamond Rolex was conspicuously missing from his wrist. Open the door, Darius shouted, kicking the bottom of the doorframe. I know you are in there. I saw Jamal's beat-up sedan in the parking lot. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, quickly opened my voice recording app and hit start. I slipped the phone into my front shirt pocket, ensuring the microphone was unobstructed. Then I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Darius pushed his way inside without an invitation. He looked around our cramped living room, a look of pure disgust twisting his features. He paced back and forth, clearly running on adrenaline and severe desperation. What do you want, Darius? Jamal asked, standing up from his drafting table and crossing his arms. You got the penthouse. You got my inheritance. Are you here to measure these curtains too? I need $50,000, Darius demanded, completely ignoring Jamal's sarcasm. I need it in cash, and I need it by tomorrow morning. I let out a harsh, genuine laugh. Are you out of your mind? You literally watched your father strip us of our entire savings and our home. We live in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling linoleum. We do not have $50,000 to give you. You better find it, Darius snapped, stepping aggressively into my personal space. Because if you do not, Dad is going to destroy both of you permanently. You think being cut out of the trust fund was the worst thing he could do? Dad is golf buddies with the head of the State Architectural Review Board. He is already drafting a formal complaint to have Jamal's license permanently revoked for professional misconduct. And you, Dad, knows the senior partners at your accounting firm. One phone call and he will have you blacklisted from every financial institution in the southeastern United States. You will be serving fast food for the rest of your pathetic lives. I forced my face to contort into a mask of pure panic. I let my shoulders slump, playing the role of the defeated, terrified woman he expected me to be. I knew exactly how to manipulate an arrogant narcissist. You stroke his ego and you make him feel like a god. Darius, please. I begged, my voice trembling perfectly. Please do not let him do that. We have nothing left. Why do you even need $50,000? You have the penthouse. You have the family trust. Calvin just paid off your $90,000 debt to the consulting firm. Darius laughed a highly unstable, frantic sound. You really think that 90 grand fixed everything? That was just the tip of the iceberg, Naya. That consulting firm was just a front for the zoning commissioner. Dad paid the bribe, but now the IRS is sniffing around the car dealerships. They froze our primary operating accounts this morning. Dad cut off my allowance because he is terrified the feds are going to trace the wire transfers. I took a slow, calculated step back, leading him perfectly into the trap. I do not understand. I whimpered, making sure my phone caught every single syllable. Why would the IRS care about your allowance? Calvin runs a legitimate business. The dealerships make millions. Legitimate, Darius scoffed, shaking his head at my apparent stupidity. God, you really are just a naive working-class girl. The dealerships are a cash washing machine, Nia. Dad takes the tax-free donations from the Faith and Legacy Foundation, funnels them through dummy corporations, and uses them to buy inventory for the car lots. We sell the cars, clean the cash, and dodge millions in federal taxes. We have been doing it for 7 years. But because you and Jamal refused to pay the zoning commissioner last month, the delay triggered an automatic financial review at City Hall, which flagged our shell companies to the IRS. Jamal stood frozen, his eyes wide as he realized exactly what I was doing. He stayed perfectly quiet, letting Darius dig his own grave. So now the accounts are frozen. Darius continued, his voice rising in panic. I have personal creditors breathing down my neck. I had to pawn my watch just to pay my lawyer a retainer. I need $50,000 cash right now to get out of town until Dad makes the IRS audit go away. If you do not wire me the money by tomorrow, I swear to God, I will ruin both of your careers before the week is over. I let the silence hang in the small living room for 3 agonizing seconds. The performance was over. The terrified, submissive daughter-in-law vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating forensic accountant. I reached into my shirt pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the red square on the screen to stop the recording. I saved the audio file, immediately backed it up to 2 separate secure cloud servers, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I looked at Darius, a slow, chilling smile spreading across my face. You are incredibly stupid, Darius, I said, my voice dropping back to its normal icy tone. You really should not explain federal tax fraud and money laundering schemes out loud. It makes the prosecution's job way too easy. Darius stared at me, his frantic energy hitting a solid brick wall. The realization of what just happened washed over his face, draining every ounce of color from his skin. What did you just do? He whispered, his voice trembling. I just acquired the missing piece of the puzzle, I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. You are not getting $50,000, Darius. You are not getting 50 cents. You can walk out of my apartment right now, or I will call the police and have you arrested for extortion. You tricked me, he stammered, backing away toward the door. You set me up. Dad is going to kill you. He is going to bury you for this. Your dad is going to be far too busy dealing with the federal government to worry about us, I said. Get out of my house. Darius stumbled backward, fumbled with the doorknob, and practically ran down the hallway. Jamal locked the deadbolt the second the door slammed shut. He turned to me, a massive grin breaking across his face. We have the confession, Jamal said, his voice full of disbelief and triumph. We have the entire operation on tape. I walked over to my laptop and plugged in my phone. Yes, we do, I said, preparing to upload the audio file alongside my massive spreadsheets. But more importantly, Darius just inadvertently handed us the greatest legal loophole of all time. Jamal walked over, looking over my shoulder at the screen. What do you mean? Think about it, Jamal, I said, pulling up the corporate documents Calvin had thrown at us during that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. Calvin was so obsessed with punishing us. He was so desperate to strip you of your inheritance and kick us out of that luxury penthouse. He legally removed your name from the family trust. He officially severed your ties to the corporate LLC that owned the property and managed the dealerships. Jamal's eyes widened as the realization hit him, By disowning me, he removed me from the criminal liability. Exactly, I said, feeling a rush of pure vindication. If Calvin had kept your name on those corporate accounts, the IRS would have frozen our assets too. We would be going down as co-conspirators in a multi-million-dollar money laundering ring. But his ego could not handle you standing up to him. He wanted to see us suffer, so he legally erased you from his corrupt empire. He did all the legal paperwork himself. He signed the documents, filed them with the state, and officially took full sole responsibility for every single dirty dollar running through those shell companies. He did not curse us, Jamal whispered, staring at the screen in absolute awe. He saved us. I smiled, organizing my digital files into one highly secure encrypted folder. He gave us a blessing in disguise. Now we are completely insulated. We have the data, we have the recorded confession, and we have absolutely zero legal ties to his impending downfall. What is our next move? Jamal asked, his posture radiating a new, untouchable confidence. I opened a new internet browser window and navigated to the official website of the Internal Revenue Service. I clicked on the portal for the Criminal Investigation Division. Now, I replied smoothly, we become official government whistleblowers. We are going to hand the federal government a perfectly wrapped, undeniable case of tax evasion. We are going to let the devil burn down his own house. Clicking submit on that IRS Criminal Investigation Portal was the easy part. The adrenaline rush of handing over the financial blueprints of Calvin's corrupt empire made us feel invincible for exactly one night. The hard part was waking up the next morning and realizing that the federal government does not move at the speed of vengeance. They move at the agonizing, meticulous speed of bureaucracy. We had lit the match, but we had to sit in the freezing cold and wait for the house to catch fire. Over the next 2 months, the adrenaline completely evaporated, leaving behind the crushing, suffocating reality of our new existence. The transition from a multi-million-dollar luxury penthouse in Buckhead to a cramped, outdated one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta was a brutal psychological shock. Our new reality was defined by a dripping bathroom faucet that the negligent landlord refused to fix, thin drywall that allowed us to hear every argument from the couple next door, and a permanent scent of stale cooking oil lingering in the narrow hallways. For Jamal, the physical confinement was slowly destroying his mind. My husband was a tall, expansive man, an architect accustomed to open floor plans, soaring ceilings, and limitless potential. In this apartment, his broad shoulders seemed to constantly brush against door frames. His drafting table, once the centerpiece of a magnificent home office, was now shoved into a dark corner between our cheap dining table and a humming refrigerator. He could barely push his chair back without hitting the wall. The financial strain was equally suffocating. Because Calvin had successfully blacklisted Jamal across Atlanta's elite commercial real estate network, my salary as a forensic accountant was our only source of income. We were pouring every spare dollar into offshore safety nets and anonymous legal retainers preparing for the impending federal fallout. That meant we lived on absolutely nothing. We ate instant ramen noodles and generic brand sandwiches. We kept the thermostat turned down to save on the heating bill, wearing heavy sweaters inside our own home. While we shivered in the dark, Calvin and Brenda were parading their stolen wealth across social media. Tasha posted daily videos giving virtual tours of the penthouse that used to be ours, boasting about the custom Italian leather furniture they had just purchased with dirty church funds. Darius uploaded photos from VIP sections at luxury clubs, completely oblivious to the federal crosshairs aimed directly at his forehead. Calvin was featured on the cover of a local business magazine, hailed as a pillar of the community and a visionary leader. Watching them thrive while we suffered in squalor pushed Jamal to his absolute breaking point. The crisis erupted on a Tuesday evening in early February. I came home from a grueling 10-hour shift at the firm to find the apartment in complete darkness. The only light came from the street lamps outside, casting long, distorted shadows across our cramped living room. Jamal was sitting on the edge of our air mattress, his head buried in his hands. His phone was glowing on the floor next to him, displaying a contact name that made my blood run cold. He had dialed Calvin's number and hung up before it connected. I dropped my briefcase by the door. "Jamal, what are you doing?" He looked up, and the sheer desperation in his eyes broke my heart. The confident, resolved man who had thrown boxes into our moving truck 2 months ago was entirely gone. In his place was a broken, exhausted son who had been stripped of his identity and starved of his father's approval. "I cannot do this anymore, Nia," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his depression. "I am looking at you wearing a coat inside because we cannot afford to turn the heat up. I am looking at my drafting table covered in dust because no firm in this city will touch me. I am a failure. I was supposed to be a provider, a protector. Instead, I dragged you down into this miserable, pathetic existence." "You did not drag me anywhere," I replied, walking over and kneeling in front of him. "We made a choice to walk away from a criminal enterprise. We chose our integrity." "Integrity does not pay the rent," Naya Jamal shouted, standing up abruptly and running a shaking hand over his face. He paced the 3 steps across our tiny bedroom, looking like a trapped animal. "I lost my career. I lost my family. I lost my entire legacy. For what? To sit in a freezing apartment and wait for an IRS raid that might never happen. What if they dismiss your whistleblower claim? What if Dad's lawyers pay off the feds just like they paid off the zoning commissioner? We threw our lives away for nothing." He grabbed his phone from the floor, his thumb hovering over Calvin's contact name. "I am calling him. I am going to apologize. I will tell him I made a mistake, that I was stressed, that I will pay back Darius's debt by working overtime at the firm. If I just get on my knees and beg, he will lift the blacklist. He will give me my license back. I can get us out of here, Nia. I can get our life back." The air in the room turned to ice. The sorrow I felt for my husband evaporated, replaced by a fierce, uncompromising rage. I did not yell. I did not cry. I moved with calculated precision. I stepped directly in front of the door, blocking his path, and snatched the phone out of his hand. I threw the phone hard against the wall. The screen shattered, raining glass onto the cheap carpet. Jamal flinched, staring at me in absolute shock. "Naya, what the hell are you doing?" "I am saving your life," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "Because you are clearly too blind to save it yourself. You want to call Calvin. You want to crawl back on your hands and knees and beg a tyrant for the privilege of building his corrupt empire." I took a step toward him, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. "Let me paint a very clear picture of what happens if you make that call, Jamal. You go back. Calvin laughs in your face, makes you kiss his shoes, and then allows you back into the family trust. He puts your name back on the LLCs. And then when the IRS finally kicks down the doors of the Faith and Legacy Foundation, because they will, Jamal, the federal government does not ignore $5 million in tax evasion. You will be standing right next to him. You will go down as a co-conspirator. You will trade this freezing apartment for a federal prison cell. Is that the life you want to get back?" Jamal opened his mouth, but no words came out. His chest heaved as the reality of my words slammed into him. "You think you are a failure because you cannot buy me designer furniture right now." I continued, pushing my finger hard against his chest. "You think my worth is tied to a penthouse I married an architect, Jamal. I married a man who builds things from the ground up. I did not marry Calvin's obedient little dog. You are mourning the loss of an identity that was never yours. Calvin designed your life. Calvin approved your projects. Calvin controlled your money. You have never been your own man until the second we walked out of that loading dock." Tears welled in Jamal's eyes. The lifetime of psychological conditioning, the deep-seated need for a toxic father's validation, was fighting a brutal war against his own logic and self-respect. "I am scared, Nia," he admitted, his voice breaking into a quiet sob. "I am so scared that I am nothing without him." I softened my stance, reaching up to cup his face in my hands. I wiped a tear from his cheek with my thumb. "You are everything without him," I said fiercely. "You are brilliant, you are talented. But right now we are standing on the edge of a cliff, and this is the make or break moment of our marriage. I refuse to be shackled to a man who chooses his abuser over his wife. I set an iron boundary, Jamal. You can go back to being Calvin's pawn. You can walk out that door, buy a new phone, and beg for your chains back. Or you can stand with me, endure the cold, and watch as we burn his corrupt empire to the ground. But you have to choose right now. Because if you choose him, I am leaving you behind. The silence in the cramped bedroom was deafening. The dripping faucet in the bathroom echoed like a ticking clock. I stared into my husband's eyes, waiting for the final verdict. I loved him with every fiber of my being, but I loved myself enough to walk away if he chose to surrender to Calvin's darkness. Jamal looked at the shattered phone on the floor. He looked at the peeling wallpaper, the cheap air mattress, and then he looked at me. The fear in his eyes slowly dissolved, washed away by a profound, agonizing realization. He took a deep, shuddering breath, exhaling the last remnants of his toxic childhood. He wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me against his chest, burying his face in my neck. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I choose you," he whispered fiercely into my skin. "I will always choose you. Let it burn, Nia. Let the whole damn thing burn to ashes." I wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders, resting my chin on his head. The crisis had passed. The emotional infection Calvin had planted in Jamal's mind had finally been completely excised. We were no longer just surviving, we were forged in fire, locked together in absolute unbreakable solidarity. We spent the rest of the night cleaning up the shattered glass and organizing our legal documents. The cold air in the apartment no longer bothered us. We had a warmth born of pure purpose. We knew that the waiting game was nearly over. The IRS had our whistleblower packet, they had Darius's recorded confession, and they had the financial blueprints of Calvin's entire money laundering operation. We just needed the perfect stage for the execution. A week later, the opportunity presented itself on a silver platter. I received an email on my secure work server from a high-profile client at my accounting firm. The client was a major corporate sponsor for an upcoming highly exclusive event in Atlanta. Attached to the email was a VIP+1 invitation. The event was the 30th anniversary gala for the Faith and Legacy Foundation. It was a massive black tie celebration designed to honor Calvin's lifelong contributions to the church and the business community. Every elite politician, wealthy real estate developer, and high society figure in the city would be in attendance. It was meant to be Calvin's crowning achievement, his ultimate display of untouchable power and generational wealth. I printed the invitation and laid it on the drafting table in front of Jamal. He looked at the gold-embossed lettering, reading his father's name printed in elegant, arrogant calligraphy. Jamal looked up at me, a sharp, dangerous smile curving his lips. "Are we going?" he asked. I picked up my coffee mug, taking a slow sip. "We are not just going, Jamal. We are going to be the main event. It is time to cash in the devil's debt. Let me take you back to the exact reality of the 2 months leading up to that gala invitation. The decision to burn Calvin's empire to the ground was not born in a single moment of anger. It was forged through weeks of systematic, ruthless psychological warfare waged against us by the very people who were supposed to be our family. The day after we hauled our cheap cardboard boxes into that freezing Southside apartment, the smear campaign officially began. Calvin and Brenda did not just want us broke. They wanted us entirely erased from Atlanta's elite society. They understood that if Jamal and I were allowed to survive and tell our side of the story, it would threaten the flawless, God-fearing image they had spent decades cultivating. So they struck first. Brenda weaponized her position at the Faith and Legacy Foundation. That Sunday, while Jamal and I were trying to figure out how to pay our electric bill, Brenda took the pulpit. She stood before a congregation of over 4,000 people, dressed in pristine white, and wept genuine-looking tears. She asked the entire church to bow their heads and pray for her eldest son. She told them a tragic, entirely fabricated story about how Jamal had been blinded by a manipulative, greedy woman who did not understand the word of God or the value of family. She painted me as a ruthless gold digger who had isolated Jamal from his loving parents and forced him to abandon his legacy, all because I was denied access to the family bank accounts. The performance was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. By Monday morning, my phone, which used to ring constantly with invitations to charity luncheons and society galas, went dead silent. Women I had considered close friends, women whose baby showers I had organized, and whose businesses I had supported, suddenly stopped replying to my text messages. When I walked into my favorite coffee shop in Buckhead to grab a cheap drip coffee before a meeting, I saw three wives of Calvin's business associates sitting at a corner table. The moment they saw me, they grabbed their designer bags, averted their eyes, and quickly walked out the door. We were being treated like we carried a highly contagious disease. But the social isolation was only the opening act. Calvin knew that to truly break a man like Jamal, you have to strip away his purpose. Jamal had spent years building a stellar reputation as a commercial architect. He worked for a highly respected firm in Midtown, designing eco-friendly office spaces. He loved his job, and he was exceptionally good at it. On Wednesday of our first week in exile, Jamal put on his best suit, kissed me on the forehead, and took the train to his office. He was determined to work overtime to take on extra commissions and to build a safety net for us. 2 hours later, he walked back through the door of our tiny apartment, his tie loosened and his face pale. His managing partner had called him into a glass-walled conference room before he even had a chance to log into his computer. The partner looked deeply uncomfortable, but wasted no time getting to the point. Calvin had called the firm the night before. Calvin's real estate development company was the firm's largest commercial client, providing nearly 40% of their annual revenue. Calvin made it explicitly clear that if Jamal remained on their payroll, every single contract with the family empire would be immediately terminated and awarded to a rival firm. The managing partner told Jamal that his hands were tied. They could not risk bankrupting the firm over a family dispute. Jamal was placed on indefinite unpaid administrative leave effective immediately. He was given a cardboard box to pack up his desk and escorted out of the building by security. Calvin had effectively blacklisted his own son from every major architectural firm in the southeastern United States. He was using his massive wealth as a blunt instrument to bludgeon us into submission. He wanted to ensure that the only way Jamal could ever put food on the table was to crawl back to the mansion, fall to his knees, and beg for mercy. The pressure was suffocating. Every day brought a new rejection. Jamal tried reaching out to independent contractors, former classmates, and old fraternity brothers. Nobody wanted to risk angering the powerful Calvin. They offered weak apologies, cited budget cuts, and quickly ended the calls. We were entirely cut off from the world we had known. This is the point where most people break. This is the moment where the psychological torment, the financial terror, and the sheer cruelty of the isolation crush your spirit. When you look at your bank account and see double digits when the people you trusted turn their backs on you, the instinct to surrender becomes overwhelmingly strong. But Calvin and Brenda fundamentally misunderstood who I was. They thought my working-class background was a weakness. They thought because I did not grow up with trust funds and summer homes, I would panic when the luxury was stripped away. They did not realize that growing up without a safety net teaches you how to survive in the dark. It teaches you how to fight when your back is against the wall. Sitting in that cramped, freezing apartment, watching my husband endure the agonizing loss of his career and his community, I did not cry. I did not waste a single ounce of energy on grief or self-pity. The isolation they forced upon us stripped away all the noise. We had no dinner parties to attend. We had no social obligations to fulfill. We had no fake friends to entertain. We had absolutely nothing but time, and time is the most dangerous weapon you can give to a forensic accountant. I walked over to our cheap, wobbly dining table and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a harsh blue light across the cramped room. Jamal looked up from the sofa, his eyes hollow with defeat. "What are you doing, Nia?" he asked quietly. "I am doing what I do best," I replied, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Calvin thinks his money makes him untouchable. He thinks because he silenced the architects and the socialites he has won. But numbers do not care about his megachurch. Spreadsheets do not care about his country club memberships. Money always leaves a trail, Jamal. Always. I logged into my secure encrypted work server. As a senior forensic accountant, I had access to sophisticated financial tracking software, public tax databases, and corporate registry archives. I had spent my entire career dismantling corporate fraudsters, embezzlers, and white-collar criminals. I knew exactly how greedy men hid their money. I knew the specific types of shell companies they used. I knew the offshore routing techniques, the fake charitable deductions, and the phantom payroll schemes. Calvin had made a fatal miscalculation. He had invited a predator into his house, handed her the keys, and then tried to lock her out without changing the locks. I had spent 3 years attending Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas galas, and corporate retreats with his family. I had sat silently at the table sipping wine while Calvin bragged about his real estate acquisitions, his dealership expansions, and his offshore vendors. I had listened to Darius complain about specific holding companies and banking fees. I had absorbed every single arrogant, boastful detail they had ever let slip. I pulled out a blank legal pad and a black pen. I started writing down every name, every corporate entity, and every charity associated with the Faith and Legacy Foundation and Calvin's luxury car network. They want to isolate us, I said, my voice cold and steady. Fine. We are isolated. We have no distractions. They want to starve us out. Let them try. I am going to tear apart every single financial statement filed by your father over the last decade. I am going to find every hidden account, every ghost employee, and every illegal tax write-off. Jamal stood up from the sofa and walked over to the table, standing behind my chair. The defeat in his posture began to recede, replaced by a slow burning realization of what I was about to do. He is a ghost, Nia Jamal warned, though a spark of hope had ignited in his voice. He has the best tax attorneys in Atlanta. He structures everything through the church to avoid audits. There are no ghosts in accounting, Jamal, I replied, my fingers flying across the keys as I initiated the first deep dive search into the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry. There is only dirty money, pretending to be clean. And I am going to scrub his entire empire until the blood shows. The smear campaign was meant to be our burial. Instead, it became our war room. The silence they forced upon us became the quiet, focused atmosphere I needed to operate. For the next several weeks, I barely slept. I lived on black coffee and sheer, unadulterated vengeance. I built massive digital webs connecting Calvin's megachurch donations directly to his dealership inventory purchases. I tracked the $90,000 debt Darius had accumulated and mapped it straight back to illegal zoning bribes. I dissected their generational wealth and exposed it as a generational crime syndicate. They thought they had stripped us of our power, but they had actually handed me the ultimate focus. I was not just building a case to clear our names. I was assembling a federal indictment. The social isolation was the catalyst I needed to turn my grief into a highly weaponized, undeniable package of evidence. We were completely alone, but we were the most dangerous people in Atlanta. And Calvin had absolutely no idea that the monster he had created was already inside the walls of his financial fortress, meticulously setting the charges that would blow his entire legacy to pieces. Forensic accounting is not like the movies. There are no flashing red screens indicating a hacked mainframe or sudden encrypted files downloading in the dead of night. Real financial investigation is a tedious, grueling war of attrition fought in the trenches of public databases, county clerk offices, and hundreds of pages of mundane tax filings. It is about reading the fine print of a charity disclosure statement at 3 in the morning until your eyes burn. I turned our small kitchen table into a command center. I had my personal laptop, a secondary monitor I bought secondhand, and stacks of legal pads color-coded by entity. Jamal sat across from me reviewing building permits and commercial blueprints he had saved from his time at his father's firm. We were operating on minimal sleep fueled by cheap coffee and an intense burning need for justice. I started with the Faith and Legacy Foundation. As a registered nonprofit organization, their annual tax filings were a matter of public record. Calvin was arrogant enough to assume nobody would ever dare question a powerful man of God, so his paperwork was incredibly sloppy. He hid his greed in plain sight, burying massive expenditures under vague, unverified categories like community outreach grants and developmental consulting. But numbers have a specific gravity. When you move heavy amounts of cash, it leaves an undeniable footprint in the ledger. I cross-referenced the foundation's grant disbursements with the local county property deed registry. I was looking for overlapping addresses, shared registered agents, or common post office boxes. Within 72 hours, I identified 14 different limited liability companies operating out of the exact same virtual office space in downtown Atlanta. Every single one of those companies was receiving regular, substantial grants from Calvin's megachurch. I needed to connect those shell companies back to the family directly. That is when I turned my attention to the specific $90,000 debt Calvin had thrown onto the Thanksgiving table. Darius had claimed it was a crippling deficit from his cryptocurrency trading platform. But when I pulled the public judgment filings related to Darius's personal limited liability company, the story shifted entirely. The collection notice was not issued by a crypto exchange or a traditional bank. It was issued by a private consulting firm called Apex Urban Solutions. I tapped my pen against the desk, staring at the name. Why would a crypto trader owe $90,000 to an urban planning consultancy? I read the name aloud to Jamal. He looked up from his blueprints, his brow furrowed. Apex Urban Solutions, Jamal asked, walking around the table to look at my screen. That firm does not do real estate development. They are essentially a lobbying group. They consult for the Atlanta City Zoning Board. Dad uses them whenever he needs to push a commercial building permit past environmental or community objections. The puzzle piece snapped into place with a deafening click. Darius did not lose $90,000 in a bad investment. The money was a bribe. Calvin had been trying to break ground on a massive, highly contested commercial shopping complex on the west side of the city. The local community board had been fighting the development for months, citing severe zoning violations. Calvin needed the zoning commissioner to look the other way, and he used his golden child as his bagman. Darius was supposed to funnel the $90,000 bribe to the zoning commissioner disguised as a consulting fee to Apex Urban Solutions. But Darius, addicted to his fake guru lifestyle and desperate to maintain his wealthy image on social media, had embezzled the bribe money to buy his brand new Porsche. The zoning commissioner never got paid. The official grew impatient and started sending aggressive, legally binding collection notices under the guise of overdue consulting fees. When Calvin threw those papers at us during dinner, he was not trying to save his son from a bad business deal. He was demanding that Jamal and I use our hard-earned house savings to pay off a corrupt city official and cover up a felony bribery charge. Jamal sank into the cheap folding chair next to me, his hands trembling as he stared at the screen. He wanted me to pay a bribe, Jamal whispered, the absolute horror washing over his face. He wanted to use my money, clean money I earned drawing blueprints, to bribe a city official so he could build a shopping mall. He was willing to make us accomplices to a federal crime just to cover up for Darius. I squeezed Jamal's shoulder. He thought you were too blindly loyal to ever look at the paperwork, I said. But he forgot who you married. If Calvin was brazen enough to disguise a $90,000 bribe as a consulting fee, what else was he hiding in the ledger? The bribe was just a single thread, hanging from a very large, very dirty sweater. I decided to pull the thread as hard as I could. I went back to the 14 shell companies I had identified earlier. I needed to see where the money went after the church deposited it into those accounts. Since I did not have subpoena power to open their bank records, I had to use alternative tracking methods. I pulled up the commercial shipping logs and import manifests for Calvin's luxury car dealerships. Dealerships have to publicly register their high-value inventory for tax and insurance purposes. I spent 14 straight hours matching the vehicle identification numbers of the high-end luxury cars Calvin was importing from Europe against the purchasing entities. The results made my blood run completely cold. Calvin's dealerships were not buying the inventory with their own corporate operating funds. The cars were being purchased outright in cash by the 14 shell companies. I stopped typing. The glow of the monitor illuminated the absolute magnitude of the crime I had just uncovered. Jamal, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Come look at this. He leaned over my shoulder, his eyes tracing the highlighted lines on my spreadsheet. I guided him through the flow of capital, explaining the mechanism step by step. Look at the cycle, I explained, pointing to the columns. Step 1, wealthy donors and devoted congregation members make massive tax-deductible tithes to the Faith and Legacy Foundation. Step 2, Calvin, acting as the head of the charity board, authorizes millions of dollars in grants to these 14 shell companies under the guise of community development programs. Step 3, The shell companies take that untaxed charity money and use it to buy fleets of luxury vehicles. Jamal was following along, his breathing growing shallow. And step 4, he asked. Step 4. I said, tapping the screen. The shell companies transfer the vehicles to Calvin's dealerships. The dealerships sell the cars to wealthy cash buyers in the Atlanta area. When the dealership records the sale, the dirty money is magically transformed into legitimate taxable corporate revenue. Calvin gets to pocket the profit, Darius gets to play the wealthy executive, and the church congregants have no idea their Sunday tithes are funding a massive luxury car syndicate. It was a flawless closed-loop money laundering machine. They were cleaning millions of dollars every single quarter, evading massive amounts of federal taxes, and using a religious institution as their personal shield. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering. We were not just looking at a corrupt father protecting his spoiled son. We were looking at a highly organized, multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise hiding behind a stained glass window. The weight of the discovery pressed down on the small apartment. We were sitting on a financial nuclear bomb. If Calvin even suspected that we had pieced this together, the danger would escalate from social ostracization to severe physical threat. Men who launder millions of dollars do not simply send angry text messages when they are caught. They eliminate the liability. We have to go to the police, Jamal said, reaching for his phone. We have to turn this in right now. I grabbed his wrist, stopping him instantly. No, I commanded. We cannot go to the local police. Calvin practically owns half the precinct commanders in this district. If we walk into a local station with this, the files will disappear, and we will be arrested on fabricated charges before midnight. We cannot even go to the state authorities. His political reach is too deep. Then who do we go to? Jamal asked, panic edging into his voice. Nia, we are holding the blueprints to a federal crime. If they find out we know this, we are dead. We go to the only people Calvin cannot bribe, I said, feeling a cold, calculating calm settle over my mind. We go to the predators who hunt bigger predators. I opened a new tab on my browser and typed in the web address for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The screen loaded, displaying the stark clinical seal of the federal government. Calvin built his empire on the assumption that nobody would ever look past the pulpit. I continued speaking more to myself than to Jamal. He used his religion and his status to blind the community. But the IRS does not care about your social standing. They do not care how many charity galas you host or how many politicians you play golf with. They only care about the math. I began downloading the official whistleblower forms, meticulously organizing my spreadsheets. The cross-referenced property deeds, the dummy corporation filings, and the commercial import manifests into a single encrypted digital dossier. Every claim was backed by hard, undeniable public data. There was no speculation, only clinical, irrefutable evidence. We are not going to make a scene, Jamal, I said, watching the files compress. We are not going to confront him or demand an apology. We are going to smile, we are going to keep our heads down, and we are going to hand the federal government everything they need to tear his life apart, brick by brick. Jamal stared at the federal seal on the monitor, a slow, determined nod affirming his commitment. He looked around our freezing, cramped apartment, then back to the screen. He took everything from us, Jamal whispered. I hit the final save button on the encrypted folder. Yes, he did, I replied. And now we are going to return the favor. We had the digital paper trails securely locked away, but building a federal case requires more than just spreadsheets pointing to shell companies. In the world of forensic accounting, data is the weapon, but a confession is the trigger. We needed someone on the inside to verbally connect the dots, to explicitly admit that the funds moving from the Faith and Legacy Foundation to the luxury car dealerships were not clerical errors, but a deliberate criminal enterprise. I just did not expect our star witness to deliver his confession directly to my front door. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, exactly 9 days after we had been evicted from the penthouse. The winter chill had seeped into the thin walls of our Southside apartment, and Jamal and I were wearing thick sweaters sitting at the cramped kitchen table. Jamal was sketching a freelance architectural design for a small, out-of-state client he had managed to secure, while I was reviewing the latest batch of public tax records I had scraped from the county database. Suddenly, a heavy, aggressive pounding rattled our front door. The cheap wood actually bowed inward under the force of the blows. Jamal immediately dropped his pencil, his jaw tightening. He stood up instinctively, placing himself between me and the hallway. We were not expecting any visitors, and given the ruthless smear campaign Calvin had launched against us, a surprise knock felt like a physical threat. The pounding echoed again, followed by a voice that made my blood run instantly cold. "Open the door, Jamal. I know you are in there. I saw your beat-up sedan parked on the street. Open the door right now." It was Darius, the golden child, the heir apparent to Calvin's corrupt throne. Jamal took a step toward the entryway, his fists clenching at his sides. I stood up and grabbed his arm, shaking my head. I motioned for him to stay calm. I walked over to the door and looked through the scratched peephole. Darius was standing in the narrow, dimly lit corridor, but he did not look like the arrogant cryptocurrency guru who had mocked us at the Thanksgiving table. His appearance was deeply unsettling. The immaculate custom-tailored suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled designer tracksuit that looked like it had been slept in. He was sweating profusely despite the cold draft in the hallway, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. Most telling of all, the flashy diamond Rolex he always wore as a status symbol was conspicuously missing from his left wrist. Darius was panicking. His lavish lifestyle had finally collided with a concrete wall, and he was completely out of options. "What do you want?" Jamal called out through the closed door, his voice ringing with absolute contempt. "You got the penthouse. You got my inheritance. Go back to your father." "I do not have time for this," Jamal Darius shouted, kicking the bottom of the doorframe with his expensive sneaker. "I am not leaving until you open this door. I need to talk to both of you right now. It is a family emergency." I looked at Jamal, my mind racing through the tactical possibilities. An emergency for Darius meant that Calvin's financial machine was experiencing a catastrophic failure. I reached into the front pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my secure voice recording application, ensuring the microphone was perfectly clear of any lint or fabric. I pressed the red button, watching the timer begin to count up. I slid the phone back into my pocket, the lens of the microphone facing outward. I nodded at Jamal and turned the deadbolt. Darius shoved the door open the second he heard the click, marching into our tiny living room as if he owned the entire building. He looked around at the peeling wallpaper, the cheap air mattress leaning against the wall, and the second-hand dining table. His upper lip curled in profound disgust. "Look at how you are living," Darius sneered, his arrogance momentarily overriding his visible desperation. "You really gave up your entire life to sit in a freezing shoebox with a woman who does not know her place. You are pathetic, Jamal." "Get out of my house, Darius," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble. "You have exactly 10 seconds to tell me why you are here before I physically throw you down the stairs." Darius ran a shaking hand over his face, his frantic energy returning. "I need $50,000, he demanded, completely ignoring Jamal's threat. "I need it in untraceable cash, and I need it by tomorrow morning." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The absolute delusion required to walk into the home of the people you helped evict and demand a small fortune was staggering. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. "You watched your father strip us of our savings. You personally came to the penthouse to mock us while we packed our lives into cardboard boxes. We live in a one-bedroom apartment that smells like old frying oil. We do not have $50,000 to give you." "You better find it," Darius snapped, taking an aggressive step toward me. "Because if you do not wire me that money by 9 o'clock tomorrow, Dad is going to completely destroy both of you. You think getting kicked out of the family trust was the worst thing he could do? You have no idea the kind of power he holds in this city." Darius began pacing the small floor space, his words spilling out in a rapid, threatening torrent. "Dad is golf buddies with the president of the State Architectural Review Board. He is already having his lawyers draft a formal fabricated complaint to have Jamal's architectural license permanently revoked for professional misconduct. He will make sure Jamal can never draw another commercial blueprint in the United States. And you, Nia, Dad, knows the senior managing partners at your accounting firm. One phone call from Calvin, and he will have you blacklisted from every financial institution in the corporate sector. You will be ringing up groceries for the rest of your miserable lives. Jamal lunged forward, but I stepped sharply in front of him, holding my hand up. I needed Jamal to stay silent. I needed Darius to keep talking. I forced my face to contort into a mask of pure terror. I let my shoulders slump deliberately, shrinking my posture to play the role of the defeated, terrified woman Darius expected me to be. Narcissists feed on fear, and I was about to serve him an absolute feast. Darius, please, I begged, my voice trembling with perfectly manufactured panic. Please do not let him do that. We have nothing left. You have already won. Why do you even need $50,000? You have the penthouse. You have the family trust. Calvin just paid off your $90,000 debt to the consulting firm. You have everything. Why are you doing this to us? Darius let out a highly unstable, frantic laugh. The sound bounced off the thin walls, exposing the sheer magnitude of his desperation. You really think that 90 grand fixed everything? He scoffed, shaking his head at my apparent stupidity. That consulting firm was just a front for the zoning commissioner, Nia. Dad paid the bribe to fast-track his new commercial development, but the delay in payment triggered an automatic financial review at City Hall. That review flagged our shell companies to the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS is sniffing around the car dealerships right now. They froze our primary operating accounts this morning. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression frozen in terror. I took a slow, calculated step backward, feigning complete confusion. I do not understand, I whimpered, making sure my phone caught every single syllable of his response. Why would the IRS care about your operating accounts? Calvin runs a legitimate business empire. The dealerships make millions of dollars in clean profit. Legitimate? Darius sneered, his chest puffing out with dark, twisted pride. God, you really are just a naive working-class girl. The dealerships are a cash washing machine, Nia. Dad takes the tax-free donations from the Faith and Legacy Foundation, funnels them through our dummy corporations, and uses them to buy the luxury car inventory for the lots. We sell the cars to cash buyers, clean the money, and dodge millions in federal taxes. We have been doing it flawlessly for 7 years. He was practically bragging now, his ego blinding him to the fatal mistake he was making. But because you and Jamal refused to pay the zoning commissioner last month, Darius continued, his voice rising in panicked anger. The delay brought the feds right to our doorstep. Dad cut off my personal allowance because he is terrified the IRS is going to trace the wire transfers back to my accounts. I have private creditors breathing down my neck. I owe money to people who do not care about Dad's megachurch. I had to pawn my Rolex just to pay my defense lawyer a retainer. Darius stepped closer, pointing his finger directly at my face. I need $50,000 cash right now to get out of town until Dad makes the IRS audit go away. If you do not get me that money by tomorrow, I swear to God, I will ruin your careers before the week is over. You owe me this for messing up the payment to the zoning commissioner. I let the silence hang in the cramped living room for 3 agonizing seconds. I let the weight of his confession settle into the digital memory of my phone. He had just explicitly confirmed the bribery. He had detailed the exact mechanism of the money laundering operation. He had admitted to tax evasion spanning 7 years. He had handed me the smoking gun fully loaded and off the safety. The performance was over. The terrified, submissive daughter-in-law vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating forensic accountant. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the red square on the screen to stop the recording. I saved the audio file immediately, backed it up to my secure cloud server, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I looked at Darius, a slow, chilling smile spreading across my face. My posture straightened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You are incredibly stupid, Darius, I said, my voice dropping back to its normal icy tone. You really should not explain federal tax fraud, bribery, and money laundering schemes out loud. It makes the prosecution's job way too easy. Darius stared at me, his frantic energy hitting a solid brick wall. The realization of what just happened washed over his face, draining every ounce of color from his skin. He looked at my pocket, then back at my eyes. "What did you just do?" he whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "I just acquired the missing piece of the puzzle," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "You are not getting $50,000, Darius. You are not getting 50 cents. You can walk out of my apartment right now, or I will call the police and have you arrested for extortion and blackmail." "You tricked me," he stammered, backing away toward the door, his hands shaking. "You set me up. Dad is going to kill you. He's going to bury you for this. Your dad is going to be far too busy dealing with the federal government to worry about us," I said, stepping forward and opening the front door. "Get out of my house." Darius stumbled backward into the hallway, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He fumbled with his keys, practically running down the corridor toward the stairwell. Jamal stepped forward and slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolt with a resounding click. He turned to me, a massive grin breaking across his face. "We have the confession," Jamal said, his voice full of disbelief and pure triumph. "We have the entire criminal operation on tape." "Yes, we do," I replied, walking over to my laptop and plugging in my phone to transfer the unedited audio file. But more importantly, Jamal Darius just inadvertently handed us the greatest legal loophole of all time. "What do you mean?" Jamal asked, pulling a cheap folding chair up beside me as I opened the master spreadsheet on my laptop. I pointed to the digital copy of the eviction notice and the trust fund severance documents Calvin had sent over via his lawyers the Monday after Thanksgiving. "Look at the dates, Jamal. Look at the exact timeline of when your father executed his petty revenge. He was so incredibly eager to punish us for refusing to pay Darius's bribe that he expedited the legal paperwork. He officially filed the amendments to the family trust and the corporate operating agreements on that Tuesday." Jamal squinted at the screen, still trying to connect the legal dots. "Okay, he filed them. He kicked me out of the company. How does that help us? Because in the eyes of the federal government, timing is absolutely everything," I explained, feeling a massive surge of adrenaline as the beautiful reality of the situation fully materialized. Darius just confessed that the Internal Revenue Service flagged their shell companies and froze their primary operating accounts this morning. That means the official federal investigation into the dealership's money laundering operation escalated to an asset freeze today. But your father legally removed you as an authorized officer, a board member, and a fiduciary of those exact companies over 2 months ago. I leaned back in my chair, letting the magnitude of Calvin's arrogance sink in. "Jamal, when the federal government uncovers a multi-million-dollar tax fraud syndicate, they immediately target the corporate officers listed on the operating agreements during the time of the audit and the subsequent asset forfeiture. If Calvin had simply let us stay in the penthouse, if he had just been a normal, rational human being and kept you in the family trust, your name would still be on those corrupted LLCs. The IRS would be kicking down our door right now. They would be freezing our personal bank accounts, seizing your architectural license, and dragging you into a federal indictment as a co-conspirator." Jamal's breath hitched as the realization finally crashed into him. He stared at the digitized legal documents, his eyes tracing his father's aggressive looping signature at the bottom of the severance agreement. "By disowning me," Jamal whispered, his voice thick with absolute awe, "he legally severed me from the blast radius." "Exactly," I said, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across my face. "Calvin was so obsessed with taking away your power that he accidentally granted you total legal immunity. In his desperation to leave us with nothing, he took full, unadulterated ownership of a sinking ship. He isolated the criminal liability entirely onto himself and Darius. He saved you from federal prison, Jamal." The profound irony of the situation hung heavily in the freezing air of our cramped apartment. The very act of cruelty designed to destroy my husband was the exact mechanism that would ultimately ensure his salvation. Jamal reached out and touched the screen, his hand resting over his father's signature. The last lingering shadows of his lifelong psychological conditioning simply evaporated. He was completely free. "Now," I said, turning my attention back to the keyboard, "it is time to serve the execution warrant." I opened a highly secure encrypted browser and navigated directly to the official website of the Internal Revenue Service. I clicked through the rigid clinical menus until I reached the portal for the Criminal Investigation Division. Specifically, I opened Form 211, the official application for award for original information. You are filing for the whistleblower reward, Jamal noted, watching as I began to fill out my personal identification details. I am a forensic accountant, Jamal. I do not do anything for free, I replied smoothly. Under the IRS Whistleblower Office regulations, if an individual provides original, actionable information that leads to the successful collection of unpaid taxes and penalties exceeding $2 million, the informant is legally entitled to receive between 15 and 30% of the total recovered amount. I uploaded the primary financial spreadsheet I had spent weeks building. It detailed the exact flow of capital from the Faith and Legacy Foundation, mapping the tax-free congregational tithes, as they moved into the 14 separate shell companies operating out of the downtown virtual office space. Next, I attached the commercial import manifests and the vehicle identification numbers, cross-referencing them with the cash deposits at Calvin's luxury car dealerships. I included a meticulous, heavily annotated timeline proving the systematic evasion of federal corporate taxes over the past 7 years. I estimated the stolen tax revenue to be well over $5 million, not including the massive federal penalties and compounding interest Calvin would be slapped with. Then came the crowning jewel of the entire dossier. I uploaded the pristine, unedited audio file of Darius's extortion attempt. I attached a certified transcript of the recording, highlighting the exact timestamps where Darius explicitly confessed to the $90,000 zoning commissioner bribe, the subsequent shell company flags, and the deliberate use of the church charity fund as a cash washing machine. I reviewed the entire digital packet one last time. It was flawless. It was a completely bulletproof, undeniable roadmap of a massive white-collar criminal syndicate hiding behind the veneer of Atlanta's religious elite. There was no speculation, no emotional rambling, and no room for highly paid defense attorneys to maneuver. It was cold, hard, mathematical murder. I took a deep breath, hovering my cursor over the final submission button. I looked at Jamal. He placed his hand over mine, his grip firm and resolute. We pressed down on the trackpad together. The screen flashed, displaying a stark, automated confirmation message. The evidence was now securely in the hands of the federal government. The fuse was officially lit. Now we fortify our own walls, I commanded, immediately closing the IRS portal and opening a new secure network connection. The federal government is a slow, methodical beast. They will spend the next few months verifying my data, securing federal warrants, and quietly building an airtight grand jury indictment before they ever make a public move. While they prepare to annihilate Calvin, we need to ensure our own financial architecture is completely untouchable. Over the next 2 weeks, Jamal and I operated with silent surgical precision. We knew that when the IRS Criminal Investigation Division finally executed their raid, the immediate fallout would be absolute chaos. Asset forfeiture teams would freeze every single bank account tied to the family name. We needed to guarantee that our own legitimate, clean money, the income from my accounting firm, and the freelance architectural commissions Jamal was quietly securing was entirely insulated from the impending bloodbath. I contacted a trusted corporate attorney specializing in asset protection. We established 2 anonymous limited liability companies registered in Wyoming, a state known for its impenetrable corporate privacy laws. We named the primary holding company Phoenix Horizon, LLC. We set up an intricate system of blind trusts and transferred our modest personal savings into newly minted, highly secure offshore accounts that could never be accidentally swept up in a federal freeze targeting Calvin's empire. We essentially erased our financial footprint from the state of Georgia. On paper, Jamal and I were just 2 broke, struggling renters living in a dilapidated apartment complex. In reality, we were quietly building a fortress of clean, legally protected capital, preparing to catch the massive windfall of the upcoming whistleblower reward. While we worked in the shadows, Calvin and his family lived in the blinding, arrogant light of their own delusions. They truly believed they had completely defeated us. Without Jamal around to act as the family scapegoat, Darius and Tasha leaned into their lavish lifestyle with reckless abandon. Tasha posted dozens of photos on Instagram flaunting the custom Italian leather sofas she had purchased for the penthouse. She uploaded videos of herself sipping expensive champagne on the balcony, tagging the location to make sure her followers knew she had officially ascended to the top of the family hierarchy. Brenda was even worse. She continued her relentless campaign of social manipulation, hosting extravagant luncheons for the church's wealthy elite. She played the tragic, heartbroken mother to perfection, accepting the pity and the massive monetary donations of her congregation. She publicly lamented how much she missed her eldest son, praying loudly for the Lord to deliver him from my wicked, gold-digging grasp. Calvin, meanwhile, was preparing for his crowning achievement. The Faith and Legacy Foundation was approaching its 30th anniversary. To celebrate, Calvin was organizing the most opulent, high-profile gala Atlanta's elite African-American community had ever seen. He rented out the grand ballroom of the most expensive hotel in the city. He secured local politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and prominent media personalities to attend. It was designed to be the ultimate coronation of his untouchable legacy. Every time I walked past a newsstand and saw Calvin's face on a local business magazine, or every time a former friend forwarded me one of Tasha's boastful social media posts, I felt a deep, chilling sense of satisfaction. I did not feel angry. I did not feel jealous. I just felt the cold, clinical patience of a hunter watching its prey walk blindly into a highly calibrated trap. They were busy buying new outfits, posing for cameras, and celebrating their stolen wealth. They were completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already vanished. They had no idea that the federal government was quietly assembling a team of heavily armed agents to tear their world apart. We sat in our freezing, cramped apartment eating cheap noodles and drinking generic coffee. We let them talk. We let them brag. We let them think they had completely won. We knew the storm was coming, and we were the only ones holding an umbrella. We knew the storm was coming, and we were the only ones holding an umbrella. Spring swept into Atlanta, bringing with it the stifling heavy humidity and the blinding glare of Calvin's unchecked ego. While Jamal and I sat in our cramped Southside apartment, eating generic brand pasta and monitoring encrypted servers, the family was putting on an absolute masterclass in financial delusion. Darius and Tasha were the primary offenders. Tasha's social media feed became a daily nauseating broadcast of her unearned triumphs. She posted a video of herself standing in the exact center of our former living room, twirling in a designer silk robe holding a crystal flute of imported champagne. The caption read, "God always rewards the faithful. Upgraded to the penthouse life." She filmed herself tracing the edges of the custom marble kitchen island I had painstakingly selected 2 years prior, loudly claiming she was going to rip it out because it felt too basic and working class for her elevated tastes. Darius was no better. Despite having confessed to me just weeks earlier that he had to pawn his luxury watch to pay a criminal defense attorney, he was suddenly back to posing in front of high-end steakhouses in Buckhead. He posted photos leaning against the hood of his new Porsche wearing a fresh designer watch and flashing a stack of $100 bills. They clearly believed Calvin had successfully intimidated the zoning commissioner and bought off the federal auditors. They operated under the fatal, arrogant assumption that Calvin's local political connections were somehow stronger than the United States Department of Justice. Brenda was equally busy cementing her martyrdom. She organized weekly, highly publicized prayer circles at the Faith and Legacy Foundation, shedding crocodile tears over her estranged, wayward son. She leveraged Jamal's absence to extract maximum sympathy and maximum monetary donations from the wealthy congregation. She painted a picture of a loving mother mourning a son who had been led astray by a wicked, manipulative wife. Calvin, meanwhile, was preparing for his ultimate coronation. The 30th anniversary of his megachurch was approaching, and he was transforming the milestone into a monument to his own divinity. He rented out the grand ballroom of the most opulent palatial hotel in downtown Atlanta. He hired a high-powered public relations firm to secure the attendance of local politicians, prominent judges, and elite business moguls. He wanted the entire city to witness his absolute invincibility. It was going to be a night of lavish excess, a massive celebration of generational wealth, funded entirely by the dirty money currently sitting in the crosshairs of a federal grand jury. We, of course, were emphatically excluded from the guest list. Calvin wanted to make sure our absence was noted by the elite circles of Atlanta. He wanted to project the narrative that we were banished, disgraced, and utterly defeated. But Calvin failed to understand how the corporate world truly operates. He believed he controlled the gates of high society because he owned a church and a few car lots. He did not realize that true power in this city resides in the financial sector, a sector where I commanded absolute unwavering respect. One of the platinum sponsors for Calvin's anniversary gala was a massive commercial real estate firm looking to curry favor with the church's development arm. The CEO of that firm, a shrewd, pragmatic billionaire named Elias Montgomery, happened to be a primary client of my accounting agency. Just 6 months prior, I had personally led a forensic audit that saved Elias's firm from a catastrophic multi-million-dollar hostile takeover. I had tracked down hidden liabilities that his own elite legal team had entirely missed. Elias did not care about my working-class background. He cared about my brain, my discretion, and my absolute ruthlessness with numbers. During a routine quarterly review meeting at his glass-walled office in Midtown, Elias casually mentioned the upcoming gala. He rolled his eyes, complaining about the exorbitant $10,000 price tag for a platinum sponsor table, calling it a necessary and annoying tax for doing business with Atlanta's religious elite. I sat across from him, my posture perfectly straight, and made a simple, highly calculated request. I told Elias that Jamal and I were looking to attend the event to observe some regional architectural developments, but we had unfortunately missed the public ticket allocation. I asked if he had any spare seats at his 10-person platinum table. Elias did not ask any probing questions. He looked at me, a sharp, knowing glint in his eye, understanding that a forensic accountant only asks for favors when a highly strategic move is in play. He reached into his heavy mahogany desk drawer, pulled out a thick gold-embossed envelope, and slid it across the polished glass table. The envelope contained 2 all-access VIP passes. He told me it would be an absolute honor to have the sharpest forensic accountant in the city sitting at his table. He even offered to send his private car to pick us up. I politely declined the car, but I took the heavy gold foil tickets and slipped them into my briefcase. I walked out of his office with the keys to Calvin's public execution firmly in my grasp. The evening of the gala finally arrived, and the visual contrast inside our apartment was almost cinematic. The cheap linoleum floor of our bedroom was scuffed and peeling at the corners. The leaky bathroom faucet dripped a steady, hollow rhythm that had become the soundtrack of our exile. The air smelled faintly of the damp, aging drywall that characterized this forgotten side of town. But standing in the center of that miserable, cramped space were 2 people entirely transformed. We were not getting dressed for a party. We were putting on armor for a public reckoning. Jamal stood before the cheap, warped mirror hanging on our closet door. He was wearing a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo he had kept meticulously preserved in a garment bag since his days as an award-winning architect. When we first moved into this apartment, his broad shoulders had been slumped with the crushing weight of his father's psychological abuse. He had looked like a defeated, broken man carrying the immense burden of a lost legacy. But tonight, as he adjusted his black silk bow tie, his posture was magnificent. His jaw was set with a quiet, lethal confidence. The fear that had dictated his entire life was completely eradicated. He looked like a king who had finally realized he did not need his father's permission to wear the crown. I stood beside him, smoothing the heavy fabric of my own gown. I had chosen a floor-length, impeccably tailored dress in a deep, unapologetic shade of crimson. It was not a dress designed to blend in or hide in the shadows. It was a dress designed to command the absolute attention of every single person in the room. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe style that left my face completely exposed, projecting nothing but cold, clinical authority. I applied a sharp, dark red lipstick. I looked at my reflection and saw the mechanical precision of a woman who had meticulously orchestrated the destruction of a multi-million-dollar criminal syndicate. I was no longer the frightened daughter-in-law packing cardboard boxes in a cold loading dock. I was the architect of their impending doom. Jamal turned to me, his eyes sweeping over my crimson gown. The look of pure, unadulterated admiration on his face was worth every single night we had spent shivering in this apartment. He reached out and gently traced the line of my jaw with his thumb. "You look breathtaking, Nia," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a deep, resonant certainty. They have absolutely no idea what is coming for them. I stepped into my black stiletto heels, the sharp click echoing off the cheap floorboards, like the caulking of a hammer. "Are you ready to see your father's legacy?" I asked, picking up a small, elegant clutch that held absolutely nothing but my phone, my identification, and the gold-embossed VIP tickets. Jamal offered me his arm, a dark, fearless smile spreading across his face. "I am ready to watch it burn," he replied. We walked out of the freezing, cramped apartment and locked the flimsy door behind us. We stepped out into the warm, humid Atlanta night and slid into the back of the black town car I had scheduled for the evening. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the neglected South Side streets in the rearview mirror, we sat in perfect, comfortable silence. We did not need to review the plan. The federal government was already in position. The trap had been set weeks ago, the bait had been swallowed whole, and the steel jaws were currently suspended by a single fragile thread. All we had to do now was walk into the grand ballroom, take our seats at the platinum table, and wait for the music to stop. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a masterclass in excessive, suffocating opulence. As the heavy gold-accented doors swung open to grant us entry, the sheer volume of Calvin's ego was immediately apparent. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant, blinding light over the sea of attendees. A 12-piece string quartet played a classical arrangement in the corner, though the music was nearly drowned out by the overlapping conversations of politicians, real estate developers, and megachurch pastors. Waitstaff in pristine white coats floated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne and imported caviar. Every single detail was meticulously designed to project an image of untouchable divine favor and unlimited generational wealth. Jamal handed our gold-embossed VIP passes to the usher stationed at the entrance. The young man glanced at the tickets, his eyes widening slightly as he noted the platinum sponsor designation before bowing his head and gesturing toward the absolute front of the room. I slipped my arm through Jamal's, and we stepped past the threshold. The reaction was instantaneous. In elite social circles, news travels faster than light, and the narrative Calvin had spun about our disgraceful exile was the most popular gossip in the city. As we walked down the central aisle, the atmospheric hum of the room began to shift. It started as a subtle ripple. A woman in a sequined gown paused mid-sip from her flute, tapping her husband's arm. A city councilman stopped talking and stared. Then the whispers ignited. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, my chin parallel to the floor, channeling the absolute icy composure of a woman who held the executioner's axe. The crimson fabric of my gown flowed around me like spilled blood against the stark white marble of the ballroom floor. Beside me, Jamal was a fortress of silent, lethal confidence. He did not look down. He did not shrink. He met the stares of the men who had blacklisted him, holding their gaze until they were the ones who uncomfortably looked away. We were parting a sea of hypocrites, walking straight into the belly of the beast. We located Elias Montgomery's platinum sponsor table situated directly below the main stage. Elias was already seated, surrounded by his elite corporate executives. When he saw us approaching, the billionaire stood up, a genuine, highly visible smile breaking across his face. He extended his hand to Jamal, shaking it warmly, and then offered his hand to me. The public validation from one of the most powerful real estate tycoons in the state sent a visible shockwave through the adjacent tables. We took our seats, projecting an aura of complete, unbothered belonging. It did not take long for the family to notice our infiltration. I saw the exact moment the color drained from Brenda's face. She was seated at the diamond tier family table to the right of the stage, flanked by Darius, Tasha, and several high-ranking church officials. Brenda had been in the middle of a performative laugh, playing the gracious, pious matriarch, when her eyes locked onto my crimson dress. Her fake smile shattered. She grabbed Darius's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Darius looked over, his eyes bulging with a mixture of terror and fury. He remembered our last encounter in my cramped apartment. He remembered the trap. Tasha, however, only saw a target. Ignorant to the federal crosshairs aimed at her husband, Tasha whispered something vicious into Brenda's ear. Brenda stood up abruptly, smoothing the skirt of her lavish silver gown, and began marching toward our table. Tasha followed closely behind, her high heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. Elias noticed the incoming hostility. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his bourbon, watching the drama unfold with detached billionaire amusement. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, sipping my sparkling water as Brenda and Tasha arrived at my shoulder. "What in the name of God do you think you are doing here?" Brenda hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the nearby politicians. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You have absolutely no right to step foot in this venue. You are not invited, Nia. This is a celebration of faith and family, two things you know absolutely nothing about." Tasha leaned over, invading my personal space, her cheap, overpowering perfume making my nose wrinkle. "Did the food stamps run out?" Tasha sneered, a cruel, ugly grin plastered across her face. "If you two were starving, you could have just waited by the loading dock out back. I am sure the kitchen staff would have scraped some leftover caviar into a doggy bag for you. It is honestly pathetic. Jamal, dragging your broke working-class wife in here to crash a party you cannot even afford to look at." Jamal slowly placed his water glass on the table. He turned his head and looked at Tasha with an expression of such profound, chilling pity that her cruel smile instantly faltered. He did not raise his voice. He did not show an ounce of anger. "You should really enjoy that champagne," Tasha Jamal said quietly, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man who knows the bomb is already ticking. "It is going to be the last good drink you have for a very, very long time." Tasha recoiled as if she had been slapped. Brenda stepped forward, her chest heaving with indignation. "I am calling hotel security right now," Brenda threatened, her voice shaking with rage. "I will have you both physically dragged out of this ballroom and thrown into the street where you belong. Do not test me, Nia. I will ruin whatever shred of dignity you have left in front of this entire city." I finally turned my head to look at my mother-in-law. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I let a slow, predatory smile curve the edges of my dark red lips. "Call them Brenda," I whispered, my voice slicing through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a scalpel. "Call security, 'cause a massive scene. Draw every single eye in this room directly to this table, right before your husband takes the stage. Let everyone watch you forcibly remove Elias Montgomery's invited VIP guests. I am sure the major corporate sponsors would love to see how the Faith and Legacy Foundation treats the people funding their corrupt little empire." Brenda glanced nervously at Elias, who simply raised his bourbon glass in a mock salute. Her face turned a sickly shade of gray. She realized she was completely trapped. She could not cause a public disturbance without humiliating herself and Calvin in front of their most vital financial lifelines. "Go back to your seat, Brenda," I commanded, turning my eyes away from her and locking them onto the empty microphone stand on the main stage. "The show is about to start, and you are going to want a front row seat for the grand finale." Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but the sudden dimming of the ballroom lights cut her off. The heavy, dramatic chords of a pipe organ echoed through the venue's massive sound system, signaling the beginning of the program. Defeated, furious, and radiating nervous energy, Brenda grabbed Tasha's arm and dragged her back to the family table. The crowd erupted into thunderous, sycophantic applause as the master of ceremonies took the stage. He spent 10 minutes delivering a sickeningly sweet, wildly exaggerated biography of Calvin's life, painting him as a visionary leader, a selfless servant of God, and a titan of Atlanta commerce. Every word made my stomach turn, but I maintained my statuesque posture, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I was the silent executioner waiting for the drop of the guillotine. Then, the man of the hour stepped into the spotlight. Calvin walked onto the stage wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo, waving graciously to the standing ovation. He moved with the practiced, arrogant swagger of a man who believed he was entirely untouchable. He stepped up to the clear acrylic podium, adjusted the microphone, and held his hands out to quiet the crowd. The applause died down, replaced by a reverent, absolute silence. "Thank you, Calvin," boomed his deep, resonant voice, filling every corner of the vast ballroom. "Thank you, my friends, my colleagues, my beloved congregation." 30 years ago, we planted a single fragile seed of faith in the soil of this great city. Today, we look around and see a mighty, unshakable oak tree. I watched him preach. He was a master manipulator, weaving religious rhetoric seamlessly into aggressive capitalist boasting. He spoke of the Lord's favor. He spoke of the millions of dollars the foundation had supposedly poured into community revitalization. He spoke about the sacred duty of building a legacy that would echo through generations. But a legacy is not built on concrete and steel alone. Calvin continued, resting his hands heavily on the podium, his voice dropping to a theatrical, emotional register. A true legacy is built on the unwavering foundation of family loyalty. It is built on blood. It is built on men and women who understand that personal sacrifice is required to protect the sacred institution of the family name. There are those who lose their way, those who allow greed and worldly temptation to sever their holy bonds. But those of us who remain faithful, those of us who stand united, we are the ones who inherit the earth. The absolute staggering hypocrisy of his words hit me like a physical blow. He was standing on a stage paid for with laundered money, wearing a tuxedo bought with illegal tax write-offs, preaching about family loyalty after stripping his own son of his livelihood to protect a bribery scheme. He was a parasite, wrapping himself in a holy shroud. The time for waiting was officially over. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the marble floor. Jamal watched me, his eyes burning with intense, unapologetic pride. I stood up, the crimson fabric of my gown pooling around my feet. I did not rush. I did not break into a run. I walked with slow, deliberate, punishingly calm steps directly toward the front of the stage. The spotlight illuminating Calvin spilled over the edge of the platform, catching the dark red silk of my dress. Calvin was in the middle of quoting scripture when his eyes shifted downward. He saw me. He saw the working-class girl he had tried to crush beneath his expensive Italian shoes, standing boldly in the center of his multi-million-dollar coronation. His deep, commanding voice faltered. He stumbled over a word, a sudden visible micro-expression of pure panic flashing across his face. The congregation did not notice, but I did. I saw the exact moment the illusion of his invincibility cracked. I reached the absolute front of the stage, stopping just below the podium. I stood directly in his line of sight, lifting my chin, my eyes locking onto his, with the cold, dead certainty of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. I did not say a single word. I simply looked at him and smiled. Calvin swallowed hard, gripping the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white as he stared down at the woman holding the matches to his empire. Calvin tried to recover. He blinked rapidly, attempting to break the visual lock I held on him. He leaned closer to the microphone, his lips parting to deliver the next line of his meticulously rehearsed sermon on family loyalty. But the words never left his mouth. I raised my right hand, lifting my index finger just an inch. In the elevated sound booth at the back of the grand ballroom, a young, heavily tattooed audio engineer saw my signal. Earlier that evening, while Jamal and I were supposedly admiring the venue's architecture, I had slipped that engineer a silver flash drive and a very thick, unmarked envelope of cash. I had given him one very specific set of instructions. At my signal, kill the main stage feed and play track 1 at maximum volume. The microphone on Calvin's clear acrylic podium went instantly dead. He tapped the metal grill, a hollow, lifeless thud echoing faintly across the front tables. He frowned, looking toward the sound booth, assuming it was a simple technical malfunction. He forced a charismatic, apologetic smile toward his wealthy audience, raising his hands as if to say the devil was interfering with the sound system. Then the multi-million-dollar surround sound speakers of the St. Regis Ballroom crackled to life. But it was not Calvin's smooth baritone preaching that flooded the room. It was the frantic, highly unstable, and undeniably recognizable voice of his youngest son. The dealerships are a cash washing machine, Nia. Darius's recorded voice boomed from the ceiling, the pristine acoustics of the ballroom capturing every single ounce of his arrogant desperation. The high-fidelity audio made it sound as if Darius were standing right next to every politician, judge, and megachurch donor in the room. Dad takes the tax-free donations from the Faith and Legacy Foundation, funnels them through our dummy corporations, and uses them to buy the luxury car inventory for the lots. The entire ballroom collectively stopped breathing. The string quartet in the corner halted mid-bow, creating a sudden terrifying vacuum of silence beneath the booming recording. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. Over 500 members of Atlanta's elite society sat paralyzed in their expensive formal wear, their brains struggling to process the monumental confession echoing around them. We sell the cars to cash buyers, clean the money, and dodge millions in federal taxes. We have been doing it flawlessly for 7 years. Calvin's charismatic smile completely vanished, replaced by a mask of absolute paralyzing horror. He looked out at the sea of faces staring back at him. He saw city council members who had endorsed his developments recoiling in shock. He saw wealthy congregants who had written massive checks to his charity fund covering their mouths in disbelief. The holy facade he had spent 3 decades constructing was being violently ripped away, exposing the greedy criminal underbelly for the entire world to see. But because you and Jamal refused to pay the zoning commissioner last month, the delay brought the feds right to our doorstep. Dad cut off my personal allowance because he is terrified the IRS is going to trace the wire transfers back to my accounts. Total chaos erupted at the Diamond-tier family table. Brenda leaped to her feet, her silver gown catching the light as she began waving her arms hysterically toward the back of the room. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "Turn it off right now. It is a lie. It is a deep fake. Somebody cut the power." Darius, seated just a few feet away from his mother, looked like he had been struck by lightning. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He stared up at the speakers, his own voice condemning him to federal prison. The realization of what he had done, of what I had trapped him into doing, finally shattered his arrogant delusion. "I need $50,000 cash right now to get out of town until Dad makes the IRS audit go away." "Shut it down!" Darius screamed, his voice breaking in terror. He bolted up from his chair, knocking his expensive place setting onto the marble floor with a loud crash. He shoved past a prominent local judge, sprinting down the center aisle toward the soundboard. He was frantic, his arms flailing desperately, trying to reach the engineer. "Security. Cut the speakers. Cut the speakers." But the audio engineer had already locked the soundproof door to the booth from the inside. Darius slammed his fists against the reinforced glass, screaming silently behind the barrier, while his recorded confession continued to echo mercilessly throughout the venue. Tasha remained frozen in her chair. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her manicured fingers, shattering against the base of the table, but she did not even flinch. The lavish penthouse lifestyle she had been flaunting on social media was disintegrating right before her eyes. At our table, Elias Montgomery slowly set his bourbon glass down. The billionaire real estate tycoon leaned back in his chair, his eyes darting from the panicking family to the recording, and finally to me. A slow, deeply impressed smile spread across his face. He understood exactly what he was witnessing. He was watching a masterclass in forensic destruction. The recording reached its end, the final threat from Darius ringing out before the audio cut to absolute silence. The silence in the ballroom was heavier, more suffocating than the confession itself. It was the sound of an empire collapsing. I did not wait for Calvin to find his voice. I did not wait for the security guards who were currently standing around in complete paralyzed confusion to intervene. I moved toward the velvet-lined steps leading up to the main stage. I ascended with slow, deliberate grace, my crimson dress sweeping against the dark carpet. Calvin watched me approach, his chest heaving under his custom tuxedo. His eyes were wide, wild, with the trapped feral panic of a cornered beast. He gripped the edges of the clear acrylic podium as if it were the only thing keeping him from collapsing onto the floor. I bypassed his dead microphone entirely. I walked over to a secondary wired microphone stand positioned a few feet away. The audio engineer, following my explicit prepaid instructions, had kept this specific channel completely live and maximized the gain. I pulled the microphone from the stand. The quiet rustle of the movement echoed loudly through the speakers, commanding the absolute attention of every single soul in the room. I turned to face my father-in-law, standing parallel to him on his own stage. I did not shout. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the chilling clinical composure of a judge delivering a death sentence. "Calvin," I said softly, the amplified sound carrying my icy tone to the furthest corners of the grand ballroom. "You built this entire night to celebrate your legacy. You gathered the most powerful people in Atlanta to witness your greatness. So I thought it was only fitting that they also witness the truth." Calvin's jaw worked silently, trying to formulate a defense. A lie, a threat, anything to regain control. But the charismatic preacher had lost his congregation. He had nothing left but the truth he had tried to bury. "You called me an ungrateful, arrogant little girl at your Thanksgiving table," I continued, taking a slow step toward his podium. "You told my husband that because he refused to pay a dirty bribe for your golden child, he was cut out of the family. You thought you were punishing us. You thought stripping away our home and our financial security would break our spirits and force us to crawl back to you in submission." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the horrified audience before locking back onto Calvin. "But I am not here to demand an apology, Calvin. I am actually here to say thank you." A visible tremor ran through his massive shoulders. His breathing was shallow, his eyes darting frantically toward the locked exits. "Thank you for kicking us out," I declared, my voice ringing with undeniable triumph. "Thank you for taking back the luxury penthouse. Thank you for evicting us into the cold and forcing us to pack our lives into cardboard boxes." I took one more step, standing so close I could see the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Because in your absolute blinded arrogance, you made a catastrophic legal error," I whispered the microphone, picking up the deadly precision of my words. "By legally removing Jamal from your family trust, by officially severing his name from your corporate LLCs, just to punish us, you handed him total legal immunity. You legally absolved him of all corporate liability right before the federal audit hit." Calvin's knees actually buckled slightly. He gripped the podium tighter, his knuckles turning stark white as the fatal reality of his own paperwork crashed into his brain. "You wanted to take full sole ownership of the family empire," I said, my voice rising just enough to drive the final nail into his coffin. "Congratulations, Calvin. The empire is entirely yours. Which means you and you alone left yourselves as the sole defendants for a $5 million federal tax fraud." A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The sheer magnitude of the dollar amount spoken aloud and attached to federal charges shattered any remaining illusion of a simple family dispute. This was corporate treason. You laundered charity donations through luxury cars. You bribed zoning officials. You evaded millions in federal taxes. And you did it all while hiding behind a pulpit, preaching about family loyalty and the favor of God, I stated, my eyes boring into his terrified soul. "But the IRS does not care about your sermons, Calvin. They only care about the math, and the math always tells the truth." Calvin opened his mouth, a pathetic strangled sound escaping his throat. You, he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. I finished for him, offering a cold, terrifying smile. "The working-class girl who does not understand generational wealth. I audited your entire life, Calvin. I mapped every shell company, every dummy corporation, and every single dirty wire transfer. I packaged it all into a neat, undeniable dossier, and I handed it directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service." I stepped back, lowering the microphone slightly. The absolute destruction of the man who had tormented my husband was complete. I told you I would rather build my own empire from scratch than be a slave to yours. I concluded, the absolute finality of my words freezing the blood in his veins. Your empire is finished, and the architects of your downfall were the very people you threw out into the street. The heavy silence that followed my final words was not broken by a response from Calvin. It was broken by the deafening, violent crash of the St. Regis Ballroom main doors being thrown wide open. The heavy oak and brass doors slammed against the marble walls with a force that rattled the crystal chandeliers above. It was not hotel security arriving to escort us out. It was a highly coordinated tactical breach. Over 30 men and women poured into the grand ballroom. They were not wearing formal attire. They were wearing dark, tactical gear, heavy utility belts, and navy blue windbreakers. Across the backs of those windbreakers, printed in stark, glowing yellow lettering, were the acronyms that strike absolute terror into the hearts of corrupt men: IRS, Criminal Investigation, and FBI. The synchronized precision of their entry was breathtaking. Agents immediately fanned out, securing every single exit, blocking the service corridors, and taking control of the main floor. The lead agent, a tall, imposing woman with a severe expression and a badge clipped to her belt, marched straight down the center aisle. The elite attendees of the gala erupted into pure, unfiltered panic. The smooth, refined atmosphere of Atlanta high society shattered instantly. Wealthy real estate developers knocked over their imported champagne glasses as they scrambled backward. Politicians who had been shaking Calvin's hand just an hour earlier desperately tried to blend into the shadows, terrified that cameras might capture them standing anywhere near the stage. The string quartet had completely abandoned their instruments, shrinking against the far wall. I calmly placed the microphone back onto its stand. I took a deliberate step back, yielding the floor. My part of the execution was over. The federal government was here to collect the body. Calvin remained frozen behind the clear acrylic podium. The brilliant theatrical spotlight that was supposed to illuminate his crowning achievement now felt like a brutal interrogation lamp. He looked down at the swarm of federal agents securing his gala, his chest heaving uncontrollably. He turned his desperate, wild eyes toward the VIP tables, silently pleading for his powerful friends to intervene. He looked at the local judges he had dined with. He looked at the city councilmen he had funded. They all physically turned their backs on him. They parted like the Red Sea, creating a massive, undeniable void around the stage. In the world of elite corruption, loyalty only exists until the federal warrants are unsealed. Calvin was suddenly terrifyingly alone. The immense psychological weight of his collapsing empire hit him with the force of a freight train. Calvin gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles stark white. He let out a sharp, ragged gasp. His left hand shot up to clutch his chest, grasping the lapel of his custom-tailored tuxedo. The arrogant, untouchable patriarch was disintegrating in real time. He staggered backward, his knees buckling under the sheer magnitude of his public destruction. He crashed heavily into the velvet stage curtains, sliding down until he hit the floor. A gasping, humiliated shell of a man watching his entire legacy burn to ash in front of the very community he had tried to conquer. While Calvin collapsed, the golden child decided to run. Darius, who was still trapped near the locked soundproof audio booth at the back of the room, saw the tactical windbreakers swarming the main floor. His survival instinct, entirely devoid of any loyalty to his parents or his wife, kicked into high gear. He abandoned Brenda. He abandoned Tasha. He turned and sprinted blindly toward the heavy swinging doors of the catering kitchen. He crashed through the wooden double doors, colliding violently with a line of waitstaff. Silver trays spun into the air. Dozens of crystal champagne flutes and plates of expensive hors d'oeuvres smashed against the industrial tile floor covering the kitchen in a slippery mess of glass and ruined food. Darius scrambled frantically over the debris, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the spilled champagne as he desperately lunged toward the rear service elevators. He did not make it 10 feet. The federal agents had already secured the perimeter. Two undercover FBI agents who had been waiting quietly by the loading dock stepped directly into his path. Darius tried to pivot, letting out a panicked, high-pitched yell, but a third agent tackled him from the blind side. The impact was brutal. Darius hit the wet tile floor hard, sliding through the mess of shattered glass and spilled food. The agents were on him in a fraction of a second. They pinned his arms behind his back with practiced mechanical efficiency. "Get your hands off me!" Darius screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as he thrashed against the cold floor. "Do you know who my father is? Do you know who you are touching? You have the right to remain silent," the arresting agent replied, completely unfazed by the tantrum. "I highly suggest you use it." The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Darius's wrists, the sharp clicks echoing through the cavernous kitchen. The golden child, the arrogant cryptocurrency guru, who had marched into my apartment to extort me for $50,000, was violently hauled to his feet. His designer velvet blazer was ripped at the seam and covered in kitchen grease. His face was smeared with dirt and tears. Two agents grabbed him by the arms and dragged him forcefully back out into the main ballroom, parading him in chains past the horrified stares of the entire congregation. Tasha watched her husband get dragged across the floor like a common criminal. The reality of the situation finally pierced through her thick armor of delusion. She stood paralyzed at the diamond-tier family table, her eyes wide with shock. Then the survival instinct of a true opportunist took over. She grabbed her expensive designer purse from the back of her chair and tried to quietly slip away into the crowd, lowering her head to pretend she was merely a frightened guest caught in the crossfire. She did not even make it past the ice sculpture. A female IRS special agent, holding a thick clipboard of federal warrants, stepped directly into her path. The agent held up her badge, her face entirely devoid of sympathy. "Are you Tasha, the legal spouse of Darius?" The agent asked, her voice projecting clearly over the ambient chaos of the room. Tasha stumbled backward, clutching her purse tightly to her chest. "I do not know anything," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "Whatever he did, I have nothing to do with it. I am just his wife. You cannot arrest me." "I am not here to arrest you," the agent replied coldly, flipping a page on her clipboard. "I am here to serve you with a federal notice of asset forfeiture. As of this morning, a federal judge has signed a seizure warrant for all properties, bank accounts, and luxury vehicles tied to the shell companies operated by your husband and father-in-law." Tasha blinked rapidly, her breath catching in her throat. "What does that mean?" "What are you saying?" "It means the luxury penthouse located at Unit 42B is now the official property of the United States federal government," the agent stated, handing Tasha a thick stack of legal documents. "You are legally barred from entering the premises. The locks have already been changed by federal marshals. Your vehicles have been impounded. The accounts you used to purchase your clothing and furniture have been frozen. You have absolutely nothing left. Do you understand this notice?" Tasha stared at the papers in her trembling hands. The custom Italian leather furniture, the imported champagne, the absolute unearned luxury she had bragged about on social media just hours ago. It was all gone. Wiped out in a single devastating stroke of a federal pen. She had mocked my working-class background. She had laughed when we were evicted. Now, she was the one standing in a ballroom with absolutely no home to return to. Tasha let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. The sound ripped through the ballroom, a raw, piercing wail of pure devastation. She dropped her designer purse, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the hard marble floor. She sobbed uncontrollably, her perfect makeup running down her face in dark streaks, burying her face in her hands as the federal agents simply stepped around her to continue their work. Brenda was backed into a corner near the stage, surrounded by agents demanding her identification. She was hyperventilating, holding her hands up in surrender, the pious, manipulative matriarch completely stripped of her holy armor. I stood on the edge of the stage, watching the tactical dismantling of the empire that had tried to crush us. I felt no urge to laugh. I felt no desire to walk over and mock them. Gloating is for people who are insecure about their victory. When you hold absolute power, silence is the ultimate weapon. I turned away from the stage and walked slowly down the velvet-lined steps. Jamal was waiting for me at the bottom. His posture was immaculate, his expression completely serene. He looked at his father, clutching his chest on the floor. He looked at his brother being dragged away in handcuffs. He looked at his mother sobbing in the corner. He did not show a single ounce of regret. They had forced him to choose between his dignity and their corruption, and he was finally entirely at peace with his choice. Jamal extended his hand toward me. I placed my hand in his, intertwining our fingers tightly. His grip was warm, steady, and incredibly strong. We did not say a word to each other. We did not need to. We turned our backs on the screaming, the flashing police lights, and the utter ruins of Calvin's legacy. We walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, our steps perfectly synchronized. The elite guests, the politicians, and even the federal agents parted ways to let us through. They knew exactly who had orchestrated this masterpiece of destruction, and they looked at us with a profound, terrifying respect. We pushed through the heavy gold doors, leaving the chaotic noise of the ballroom behind us. We stepped out of the luxury hotel and into the cool, humid air of the Atlanta night. The sky above the city was clear and vast. We kept holding hands as we walked down the quiet, illuminated street, moving forward into a future built entirely on our own terms, leaving the ashes of the Devil's Empire far behind in the rearview mirror. 6 months later, the ashes of Calvin's empire had completely cooled. The federal government is a notoriously slow machine, but when it finally drops the hammer, it does not leave a single stone standing. The aftermath of the St. Regis Gala was a relentless, highly publicized corporate slaughter. Calvin and Darius were denied bail, deemed flight risks due to the offshore accounts I had so helpfully mapped out for the prosecution. They were currently sitting in federal holding cells, waiting for a sentencing hearing that was merely a formality. Both men were facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years in federal prison for conspiracy, tax evasion, and money laundering. The luxurious car dealerships that had served as their cash washing machine were seized and liquidated at federal auction. The Faith and Legacy Foundation was completely gutted, its board of directors dissolved, and its assets frozen. The grand, sprawling Buckhead mansion where Calvin had thrown his Thanksgiving extortion dinner was seized by the bank. The fallout hit the enablers just as hard as the architects of the crime. Tasha, stripped of her designer labels and the penthouse she had tried to claim as her own, quietly filed for divorce and moved out of state, desperate to distance herself from the radioactive family name. But the most poetic justice was reserved for Brenda. The pious, manipulative matriarch who had weaponized her religion to isolate us found herself entirely abandoned by the congregation she had exploited. Stripped of her husband's stolen wealth, she was forced to move into a cramped, outdated rental apartment on the exact same neglected side of Atlanta she had previously mocked us for living in. The irony was sharp, but the desperation was even sharper. On a rainy Tuesday evening, as Jamal and I were sitting in our kitchen, his phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from Brenda. Jamal put it on speaker. Her voice filled the room, trembling with manufactured tears and panicked urgency. She pleaded with Jamal, calling him her firstborn, her precious boy. She begged him to send her money for groceries and rent, claiming she had absolutely nothing left. She tried to invoke the same holy guilt she had used for decades, reminding him that the Lord commands children to honor their parents. Jamal listened to the entire voicemail without a single change in his expression. His face remained completely calm, his posture relaxed. He did not show anger. He did not show pity. He simply looked at the phone, seeing his mother not as an authority figure, but as a toxic anchor he had finally detached from his soul. Jamal picked up his phone, tapped the screen twice, and permanently blocked her number. He looked across the table at me and smiled. "I do not have a family named Calvin or Brenda," he said smoothly. "It is just you and me." That simple, decisive action was the final severance. The psychological chains were permanently broken. While Calvin's bloodline was facing absolute financial ruin, my meticulous forensic work was finally paying dividends. The United States government actively incentivizes citizens to expose high-level tax fraud, and they compensate those informants exceptionally well. Because my encrypted dossier provided the exact, undeniable blueprints that led to the successful recovery of over $5 million in stolen back taxes. I was officially granted the maximum IRS whistleblower reward. When the federal wire transfer hit our newly established, heavily protected corporate account, the number was staggering. A percentage of $5 million translates into a massive, life-changing sum of clean, fully taxed, and absolutely legitimate capital. It was not money stolen from a church congregation. It was not money laundered through a luxury car lot. It was a reward earned through intellect, patience, and lethal precision. With that clean capital, Jamal and I rebuilt our lives entirely on our own terms. We did not move back to Buckhead. We had no desire to return to a neighborhood built on false pretenses and toxic social climbing. Instead, we purchased a stunning, modern, eco-friendly home nestled in the quiet, tree-lined hills of Decatur. It featured soaring ceilings, massive windows that flooded the rooms with natural light, and a massive custom-built home office designed specifically for Jamal. Jamal used a portion of the funds to launch his own independent architectural firm. Without the suffocating shadow of his father's corrupt real estate network blocking his path, Jamal's talent exploded. His designs were innovative and brilliant. Clients who had previously shunned him quickly realized that Jamal was the true genius behind his father's past developments, and his firm became highly sought after across the state. We also knew exactly what to do with the remaining capital. We established a private architectural scholarship fund at Jamal's alma mater designed to fully sponsor the education of brilliant working-class students from the south side of Atlanta. We wanted to build a genuine legacy, one that actually lifted people up instead of exploiting them. But as a forensic accountant, I always ensure my contracts are bulletproof. I personally drafted the legal bylaws for the scholarship fund. Buried deep within the ironclad legal requirements was a highly specific permanent exclusionary clause. The charter legally barred any individual possessing a traceable bloodline connection to Calvin from ever receiving a single cent of the foundation's money. We made absolutely sure that Calvin's corrupt legacy ended with him. Sitting on the back patio of our new home watching the sunset paint the Atlanta sky in vibrant shades of orange and purple, I rested my head on Jamal's shoulder. We had survived a psychological war, a financial eviction, and a ruthless smear campaign. We had walked through the fire and emerged entirely unscathed, holding the keys to our own kingdom. We learned the hardest lesson a person can learn about the people who raise them. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. We realized that true power does not come from intimidating others or hoarding stolen wealth. True power is the quiet, unbreakable confidence of knowing your hands are clean. And sometimes the best way to build your empire is to let the devil burn down his own.